Hi everyone. Tonight, we're stepping inside a Viking longhouse on a night so cold your breath would freeze before you finish exhaling. Picture it. Snow crunching outside, an icy wind pushing against timber walls, and the fire's flicker casting shifting shadows across the smoky rafters. You settle onto a wooden bench wrapped in animal skins, and the first thought that crosses your mind is simple. How did anyone endure this? The second comes even faster, you likely wouldn't. Before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content. And while you're at it, share your location and local time in the comments. It's always interesting to see where everyone is watching from. Now, dim the lights, because this story will pull you into the heart of Viking nights. The Longhouse is your barrier against the Arctic cold, but only barely. Built from heavy timber and sealed with turf and mud, the hall is wide enough to hold a family and their animals, yet still drafty enough that the cold slips in through every seam. You stretch out on the rough planks and feel the chill drift across your face, reminding you that proper insulation is a modern comfort. Historical accounts describe longhouses as dark, smoky, and constantly damp, but they were sturdy enough to withstand Scandinavia's endless winters. What you notice first is the smell, with smoke hanging thick in the rafters, mixed with the damp scent of the turf roof and the musky odor of animals kept at the far end. It's an aroma that settles into your skin, hair, and bedding, something you carry whether you want to or not. Archaeologists have found carbon deposits blackening the beams from centuries of smoke, proof that fires burned constantly. You can almost hear logs hissing as they hit the embers, the crackling sound pushing back against the stillness of the night. Here's the accepted historical fact. The longhouse was the central structure of Viking life, sometimes stretching nearly 70 feet, with a hearth running down the center. Without it, surviving Scandinavian winters would have been nearly impossible. But there are unusual details, too. Some longhouses were so poorly ventilated that visitors often complained of thick, choking smoke. Imagine trying to sleep when every breath feels like inhaling a fire. Some researchers even suggest the constant smoke helped preserve roof timbers by killing pests that would have damaged the wood. So while the smoke may irritate your lungs, it also acted as an accidental form of pest control. You turn onto your side and listen. The longhouse is full of sound. Low animal grunts, people shifting on straw bedding, a cough here, a quiet prayer there. It's far from the peaceful silence of a modern bedroom. It's a shared living space almost like a barn. The walls creak under the pressure of the wind, and each gust squeezes through the cracks like cold fingers. And yet, despite everything, there's a sense of warmth in this closeness. Scholars still debate how well these halls actually worked. Some argue they offered decent protection thanks to turf insulation and tightly fitted planks. Others claim sleeping inside wasn't much warmer than being outdoors, just less windy. Which view is correct remains uncertain. But what's clear is that Vikings accepted discomfort as a normal part of life. For them, shivering under layers of fur wasn't a failure. It was simply how things were. Close your eyes now and imagine the scene. Outside, auroras move across the northern sky. But inside the hall, your world is shadows, firelight, and the soft sounds of people gathered against the cold. The fire glows at the center, casting everything in shades of amber and smoke. Your fingers stiffen from the chill, yet you hold onto the comfort of warmth and community. This was survival, not luxury. And as sleep approaches, you wonder what other methods these people used to fight the cold. The hall around you creaks under its own weight, a mass of timber and turf pressed into the earth. You trace the walls with your eyes, noticing how thick and enclosing they are, as if the Vikings understood perfectly that thin planks would never withstand the bitter cold. These walls are layered, a careful mix of logs, clay, and sod arranged to keep the chill out. If you picture stepping outside into the snowstorm pounding the longhouse, the contrast indoors is noticeable. It may not be warm by modern standards, but it is livable, and that difference often meant survival. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia reveal the same pattern again and again. Longhouses built with turf roofs and thick earth layers pressed around timber frames. This was no coincidence. The physical evidence still in the ground makes that clear. The roofs were built low, letting snow gather like a free insulating blanket, while the walls tilted inward as if the whole structure braced itself against the wind. You can almost sense the weight of the snow above. Instead of collapsing, the house actually became warmer as the snow sealed small gaps. It was a clever solution. You build the roof and nature adds insulation. Still, living inside one was far from ideal. The interior was dark, narrow, and coated with soot from constant fires. Yet the design, the turf, the wood, the low profile, is what allowed families to make it through harsh Arctic nights. Modern visitors would likely complain within minutes, coughing and shivering, but Vikings considered this normal comfort. And here's an interesting point. Similar turf house styles survived well into recent centuries in Iceland and the Faroe Islands. Icelandic farmhouses continued using thick turf layers until the 19th century. Imagine a building method so effective that it lasted nearly 1,000 years after the Viking Age. It wasn't nostalgia. It was simple practicality. You pull your cloak tighter and notice the inner walls. They aren't smooth. They swell where turf and mud were packed tight, and they peel where smoke has blackened the surface. The smell is constant, slightly sour from moisture trapped inside. But this was everyday life. The walls didn't just enclose the space. They functioned like a breathing surface, soaking up damp air and letting smoke escape slowly through the roof. Did this really keep the interior warmer than a plain timber hut? Some researchers argue yes. Turf worked like early insulation. Others say the effect was minor and that the fire alone provided real heat. And so you lie there, still unsure which explanation is more accurate. The sounds inside add to the sense of reality. You hear beams groaning under snow, occasional drips where ice has melted through, and the dull thump of wind pushing against the turf siding. With no windows, your senses heighten. You rely on your ears, nose, and skin to understand the world in the dark. The walls do more than stand. They creak, shift, shelter, and strain against the northern cold. It is important to remember that these houses weren't designed to last like modern buildings. A longhouse might stand for a generation or two, maybe longer with good upkeep, before wood decayed or turf wore away. But during that time, it gave families and their animals a way to survive winters that would otherwise be deadly. Most experts agree that the large size of these structures, sometimes up to 20 meters long, was part of their heating system. More people and livestock meant more shared body heat. The house didn't only block the cold, it captured warmth. Here is another detail worth noting. Some excavations show longhouses slightly dug into the ground, using the earth itself as insulation. You imagine the walls not rising above the soil but sinking into it, the wind sweeping just over the roof while the ground muffles sound and cold. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. That small design choice may have saved many lives. Still, historians don't always agree on how much comfort these structures provided. Several argue that longhouses were often smoky and cold, barely suitable for living. Some argue that survival in these structures depended more on thick fur clothing than on the buildings themselves. Others disagree, pointing to evidence of intentionally designed airflow systems, suggesting the Vikings understood ventilation better than we assume. Without written guides left behind, the truth sits somewhere between these ideas, and you're left lying under the turf roof, breathing in the blend of warmth and smoke, wondering which explanation comes closest to reality. As you settle deeper into this imagined night in a longhouse, the communal nature becomes clear again. These homes were never silent. The heavy walls gave a sense of security, almost like a fortress, but it was the presence of people that turned it into a home. Children whispering, animals snorting, your neighbor's steady breathing. Each sound reflects off the turf and timber, forming a quiet lullaby of survival. In a world where snowstorms could swallow entire settlements, the longhouse acted like a protective shell, tight, warm, and close. What is certain is that the Viking longhouse was not built for comfort, but as a practical response to the harsh environment. Its construction was simple yet full of intention. It caught snow, stored heat, softened the wind, and sheltered people and livestock together. You might wrinkle your nose at sharing a smoky room with cows and goats, but for the Vikings, it meant warmth on the coldest nights. Lying there, you can't help but think about the effort needed to create such a place. Cutting trees with iron axes, dragging heavy turf blocks, layering mud, all in freezing weather. The very existence of a longhouse speaks of endurance and determination, qualities deeply tied to the people who built them. You wonder if even the act of construction brought them comfort, knowing each log and turf piece was another step toward surviving the year. Outside, the storm continues to roar, but indoors the thick walls soften its force. The longhouse creaks and shifts, the fire crackles, and your breath mixes with smoke and moisture rising from the damp ground. It isn't comfortable, not by your standards. Yet for the Vikings, this thin line between warmth and cold meant survival. As your eyes drift shut again, you understand the strength of their solution. Not defeating winter, but enduring it. The glow of the central fire becomes your entire world. It is more than heat. It is the core of life in the longhouse. Every Viking night revolved around that single flame, and without it, the hall would fall into silent frost. You stretch out, feeling the warmth move across your skin like a slow wave. Too close and you sweat. Too far and your toes stiffen with cold. The fire gives generously, but it also demands caution. Archaeologists often uncover long stretches of burned earth running down the center of these halls. These marks are the remains of open hearths, sometimes running the full length of the room, other times divided into sections. This evidence is clear. Fire sat at the heart of Viking life, literally. Provided heat, light, and a place for cooking. Without it, no one inside would have slept, eaten, or survived the night. And yet, one interesting detail appears in some sagas. They describe fires being carefully banked with ash at night, so they would smolder until morning. This method kept the embers alive while saving precious fuel. You can picture a Viking kneeling, gently covering the glowing coals with gray ash, preserving the warmth like treasure under a protective layer. It's an ancient version of pressing the snooze button, ensuring a small ember would be waiting at dawn, ready to spark back into flame. But living with fire also meant living with danger. A stray spark could easily land on straw bedding or wool clothing. One loose ember, and the longhouse could turn into an inferno. The smell of scorched fur or burned fabric likely wasn't unusual. Some researchers note that the long, stretched-out hearths actually increased the risk. The larger the fire, the greater the chance of an accident. And still, families slept around it every night, because the alternative was freezing in the dark. As you shift in your imagined bedding, you become aware of how uneven the warmth truly is. One side of your body enjoys the heat, while the other feels cool, touched by drafts slipping in under the door. This constant balance of firelight is exactly what Viking families lived with. Too close to the flames, you inhale smoke and risk burns. Too far away, you curl tightly, leaning into others just to catch a bit of heat. Modern scholars still debate how these fires were arranged. Some suggest there were raised stone borders to keep the blaze contained. Others point to the remains of flat hearths as evidence that the fires were simply open, with flames rising freely through the night. It's still uncertain, and the lack of preserved stonework in many digs makes the truth difficult to confirm. You're left imagining either possibility: a neat glowing strip or a loose mound of embers sending sparks into the dark. You listen to the sounds around the hearth. The wood snaps sharply, softened by the faint hiss of sap reacting to heat. The fire crackles, and sometimes a log shifts with a deep thud. These sounds travel through the longhouse, blending with the slow, steady breathing of the people lying nearby. The fire warms the body, but it also eases the mind. In a world where nights felt endless, that steady rhythm must have worked like its own quiet lullaby. One widely accepted point is that the fire served as the only real source of light inside. Oil lamps and torches may have appeared now and then, but they weren't primary. Picture trying to move across a crowded hall guided only by a narrow band of firelight. Shadows stretch and change, flickering against turf walls. Children stir awake and mistake those shapes for spirits. In that shifting glow, the everyday and the supernatural blend together, giving life to stories. It's easy to understand how tales of ghosts, gods, and heroes could form in this dim space. There's also an interesting detail worth noting. Some Viking longhouses had multiple hearths instead of just one. Excavations in Greenland uncovered large halls with several fire pits, possibly for different families or separate tasks. This suggests a shared yet divided environment, almost like having several small worlds under a single roof. You can picture overlapping zones of warmth, families gathered around their own flames, but of course there was a major drawback: the smoke. With no chimneys in early structures, smoke rose and gathered under the rafters before drifting out through the roof. The upper part of the hall filled with soot, and the beams darkened after only a few winters. Visitors often described the interiors as smoky and dim. Some experts believe people slept close to the ground partly to avoid the thickest clouds above. It's a practical but ironic adaptation. The hearth sustains life, yet you must stay low to escape its harsh breath through the night. Think for a moment about the sensory impact this created. The heat intensifies, the smoke irritates your eyes, but the alternative, cold, is far worse. You lie there with tears on your cheeks, coughing, yet unwilling to leave the warmth. Was it worth it? To the Vikings, the answer was always yes. There's also a compelling idea raised by some researchers. The fire may have held spiritual importance, not just practical value. The hearth might have been seen as a sacred center, with household gods or protective spirits tied to it. Feeding the fire and tending the embers could have been acts of respect as much as necessity. You might imagine a mother offering a quiet prayer as she adds a log, trusting the flame to safeguard her family until morning. Now picture the rhythm of an entire night shaped by this glow. The fire fades. Someone wakes to add wood. The smoke thickens. The hall settles again. The cycle continues until daylight finally slips in through gaps in the roof. You never sleep deeply in a longhouse. Instead, you drift between waking and dreaming, your senses tuned to the heartbeat of the hearth. And so, as you move closer to that imagined flame, you recognize its paradox. It is both guardian and danger, comfort and discomfort. Yet without it, you wouldn't make it to another dawn. But with that warmth came a price. Smoke, discomfort, and nights spent fighting for clear air. For the Vikings, though, this balance was simply part of daily life, the steady rhythm of their world. The longer you rest inside this smoke-filled hall, the more you begin to notice the unusual movement of the air around you. At times, the smoke drifts gently upward, curling toward the rafters like pale ribbons. Moments later, it drops suddenly, burning your throat and bringing tears to your eyes. You cough, pull your cloak closer, and realize that ventilation was the constant challenge of the Viking longhouse. Too much airflow meant freezing cold. Too little meant choking on thick smoke. There was never a perfect point, only an ongoing struggle between cold drafts and heated, smoky air. Archaeological findings show simple roof openings, narrow gaps along the ridge meant for letting smoke escape. These were not decorative chimneys but small slits, sometimes covered with movable boards or turf that could be shifted depending on the weather. You can almost picture a tired Viking nudging a roof plank into place, muttering at the drifting smoke that refused to rise properly. The solution was basic but thoughtful. Create enough suction to draw smoke upward while keeping as much heat inside as possible. Even with these adjustments, the blackened rafters and soot-stained beams reveal the truth. Smoke lingered everywhere. It clung to surfaces, soaked into clothing, and left every longhouse smelling like a constantly burning fire. Many researchers argue this wasn't a small inconvenience but a lasting health issue. Imagine breathing that air every night. Eyes irritated, lungs burning, sleep constantly interrupted. The walls blocked the wind, but the fire filled your body with ash. Here's an interesting point. Despite the discomfort, some experts say smoky interiors may have offered unexpected advantages. The constant haze likely kept insects away, driving off flies and mosquitoes in the warmer months. The smoke may also have slowed bacteria growth in stored food. So while the coughing hurt your chest, your supplies stayed fresh longer and your animals remained healthier. It was a strange compromise, harmful to breathe yet helpful for survival. The feeling of lying in that thick haze becomes almost real when you picture it. Your skin tingles from the sharpness in the air. Your hair carries the permanent scent of wood smoke, and you hear every subtle shift in the draft. Ventilation becomes a daily concern. Which way is the wind blowing? Should the smoke hole be opened wider? Is it worth losing precious heat? These choices determined whether the family coughed through the night or shivered in the darkness. Specialists still debate how well these smoke holes worked. Some say they created enough airflow, especially with the natural gaps in the walls. Others argue they did very little, barely improving conditions at all. With no complete Viking roof surviving today, the argument continues without a final answer. You're left imagining the constant struggle. Heat escaping, smoke sinking, people shifting restlessly under blankets, trapped between the two. There's also an unsettling detail. The smoke didn't simply rise and disappear. Soot collected in thick layers, so heavy that some surviving roof beams are almost glossy black. In certain sites, archaeologists have scraped away centuries of hardened residue, a stark reminder of countless fires that once burned below. If the walls of those longhouses could speak, they would wheeze. Yet even this harsh reality brought another unexpected benefit. The soot coating may have actually protected the wood, sealing it against insects and decay. What looked like damaging pollution may have acted as natural preservation. You can imagine Viking builders feeling satisfied, not because they understood the science, but because the beams survived longer than they expected. Sometimes survival came from simple chance. Now listen closely to the sounds inside the smoky hall. You hear a child whimper softly from the sting in her eyes, and a goat coughing in the far corner, and the faint shuffle of someone rising to adjust the fire breaks the stillness. Each movement stirs the smoke once more, interrupting the rhythm of the night. There is no clean or comfortable rest here, only the uneasy sleep of people adapting to air that always carries the taste of fire. Some sagas even hint at this challenge, mentioning characters lying in smoke or cursing the dark haze clinging to the beams. The language itself holds the memory of this discomfort. Yet, as inconvenient as it seems, people eventually grew used to it. Just as modern city residents learned to ignore constant traffic noise, Vikings likely trained themselves to breathe through smoke, cough, turn over, and keep sleeping. It was simply the cost of staying warm. There is also a psychological element to consider. In the dim haze, shadows moved across the walls, making the rafters seem larger than they were. Half awake, eyes stinging from smoke, the mind could easily imagine spirits, ancestors, or wandering gods taking shape in the shifting light. Perhaps the smoke helped fuel their imagination, feeding stories born in the firelit darkness. Folklorists think so, pointing out how many Norse myths are filled with images of haze, dusk, and shadows. In this sense, choking on smoke may have also meant giving form to myth. The contradiction is clear. Ventilation was a compromise. The smoke hole kept the air moving, yet it was never fully effective. Cold weather demanded it be shut. The fire demanded it be open. Every night, families navigated that balance, adjusting, coughing, and enduring. And as you settle deeper into your furs in this imagined hall, you realize you are also part of that ancient struggle. Each breath reminds you that warmth was never free. Your back aches from the wooden planks, so you shift slightly and uncover another detail of Viking nights. Raised sleeping platforms. These weren't elegant beds with carvings or feather mattresses. They were simple benches along the longhouse walls, wide enough for a family to lie across. Sometimes they were only rough planks or woven branches topped with straw. But compared to sleeping directly on the packed dirt, they offered comfort and, more importantly, survival. Archaeologists have found evidence of these platforms in excavated halls. Post holes along the walls, discolored patches of soil where would once rested, even layers of decayed straw pressed into the earth. The findings are consistent, and most scholars agree that these raised benches were standard features. Sleeping above the ground served two key purposes. You stayed away from the damp cold rising from the floor and out of reach of small animals or pests. It is one of those adaptations that seems obvious in hindsight, mostly because others learned the lesson long before. Picture yourself lying on one of these benches. Your body is lifted a foot or two above the dirt, and instantly the chill softens. The floor below is dark, damp, and uneven, But on the planks you feel air moving instead of moisture seeping into your bones. A thin layer of straw softens the wood, and animal skins cover you like heavy, musky blankets. The difference between shivering through the night and slipping into uneasy dreams often depended on this simple wooden ledge. There is another interesting feature. Some benches doubled as storage. People tucked belongings, tools, and sometimes even food beneath them, turning these raised sleeping areas into practical furniture. You might lie down knowing the axe you sharpened earlier rests just beneath your head, or that your winter vegetables are safely stored away from curious animals. It wasn't luxury, it was practicality. But how many people shared these benches? The answer is almost everyone who could fit. Written accounts from the sagas and comparisons with later traditions suggest whole families lying together, children between parents, and at times relatives or servants in the same row. Privacy was a modern idea. In the longhouse, warmth always came first. Your neighbor's elbow might dig into your side, or their snoring might rattle your head. But their body heat could mean the difference between comfort and cold. Experts still debate how wide these sleeping platforms actually were. Some reconstructions show narrow planks barely bigger than a modern single bed, while others suggest wider ledges running along the wall, more like shared couches than personal bunks. With the evidence incomplete, the discussion continues. And as you lie here in your imagined hall, both possibilities feel believable. A tight, individual board or a broad communal shelf where half the household rested together in a tangle of limbs and blankets. The sensation is easy to picture. You climb up, feel the wood groan under your weight, and settle into straw that scratches your skin but carries a faint, sweet smell. Above you, the rafters strain under winter snow. Beside you, someone shifts, mumbles in their sleep, and edges closer. Here, you are never fully alone, never free from the heat, the closeness, or the noise of others. A curious discovery in Denmark revealed layers of burned straw bedding, suggesting these benches sometimes caught fire when sparks drifted from the hearth. Imagine the shock of waking to a smoldering mattress. Did families jump up shouting, or simply smother the flames with cloaks and lie back down, too exhausted to worry? The archaeological traces leave the details unclear, but they highlight how fragile daily life could be. With a central hearth burning only a few steps away, the benches created a tiered indoor climate. Heat rose, smoke hovered, and the sleepers found themselves in a middle zone, not freezing on the ground and not choking near the roof, but somewhere in between. The air wasn't pristine, yet it was breathable. It was a functional compromise shaped directly by the building around them. These raised platforms also influenced social life. Benches closest to the fire may have belonged to elders or higher status individuals, while less desirable spots were used by servants or guests. Sleeping arrangements quietly reflected hierarchy, the placement of bodies mirroring the placement of authority. Think of it as a Viking-era seating chart enforced nightly. As you push deeper into your imagined bedding, you feel both relief and discomfort. Relief that you aren't lying in the mud with cold creeping through your bones. Discomfort from the cramped space, the itchy straw, and the fire throwing sparks a little too close for safety. This was the Viking bed. Plain, smoky, shared, and absolutely essential. The raised platform wasn't luxury, but when winter storms roared outside and the world hardened with ice, it was enough. Enough to rest. Enough to stay alive. And as your eyes close in the flickering firelight, you realize survival often depended less on beating the cold and more on gaining even the smallest advantage over it. Plank. A layer of straw. A surface just above the frozen earth. You run your fingers across the bedding and notice it's more than rough straw and wooden boards. It's a layered system built out of necessity. First came a base of dried grass or reeds, replaced whenever possible. On top of that lay wool blankets, and finally the most valued covers of all, thick animal skins. These were the Viking version of duvets, heavy, warm, and carrying a musky scent that reminded you survival smelled more like sheep or reindeer than anything pleasant. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of bedding. Bits of burnt straw, pieces of sheep wool, even goat hair woven into blankets. These small traces support what the sagas imply. Wool was the foundation of comfort. Scandinavian sheep, tough and densely fleeced, produced fibers strong enough to withstand endless winters. Woven into blankets or cloaks, wool held heat even when damp, a natural miracle long before synthetic fabrics existed. Your nose may itch, but your body appreciates the warmth. Here's an interesting detail. Not all bedding came from nearby sources. Some furs arrived through long trade networks. Bear pelts from the north, beaver skins from the east, even soft reindeer hides from Lapland. Sleeping under such coverings wasn't just about comfort. It signaled status. Imagine resting beneath a gleaming pelt that had traveled hundreds of miles, showing that your family had resources or valuable connections. Bedding quietly acted as a marker of prestige. Now picture the physical feel of it. The straw beneath you scratches, the wool above irritates your skin, and the furs lie heavy across your chest. Yet together, these layers form a barrier against the cold drafts slipping through the turf walls. Without them, the chill would slowly seep in, numbing your toes and stiffening your joints. With them, you might actually fall asleep rather than tremble through the night. Experts still debate how thick these sleeping layers were. Some reconstructions show only a thin layer of straw, while others imagine deeper piles refreshed often, almost like early mattresses. There's even discussion about whether animal skins were placed under sleepers or over them. Did people lie on furs and cover themselves with wool, or do it the other way around? The evidence doesn't fully answer that, leaving scholars to argue their interpretations. You're left imagining both possibilities, wondering which version resulted in fewer flea bites. Fleas, after all, were always present in Viking households. Wool and fur offered warmth but also ideal hiding places for insects. Archaeological studies of Viking graves reveal insect remains in clothing and bedding, clear proof that nightly itching was normal. It's almost humorous to picture a warrior bold enough to sail icy seas yet irritated by tiny creatures under his blanket. Survival was far from glamorous. And then there was the smell. Wool carried a natural lanolin scent, earthy and slightly oily. Furs held the lingering musk of the animals they came from. Combined with smoke from the fire and moisture from the turf walls, the longhouse had its own raw, unfiltered aroma. Did people notice it? Or had their senses adapted until this blend of animal, earth, and smoke simply became the familiar scent of home? Anthropologists believe the latter, noting how quickly humans grow accustomed to their surroundings. Another small detail appears in sagas and folklore. Bedding was sometimes blessed or charmed. A child's covering might be placed with whispered words meant to guard against the spirits of the cold. This suggests blankets served not only as physical protection but spiritual protection too. To wrap yourself in fur was to wrap yourself in a sense of safety, both practical and symbolic. You can imagine a mother smoothing a pelt over her child, quietly asking Thor or Freya to keep the night gentle. Think about the texture of these nights. You shift on straw that rustles beneath you, pull a woolen cloak closer to your face, and feel the firm weight of a fur pressing down. The air still feels cold, but your body warms the layers, turning discomfort into something more manageable. In these moments, survival doesn't feel brave. It feels routine. Another night endured, another morning waiting beyond the snow. You close your eyes in that layered nest and realize how simple materials, grass, wool, and hide, became tools for surviving the climate. No silk sheets, no feather mattresses, just the practical use of what nature offered. And despite the itching, pests, and weight, you still sleep. Because in the Viking world, that was enough. The fur resting on your chest feels heavier than wool, softer than straw, and clearly foreign. You recognize it instantly. This didn't come from the sheep grazing near the longhouse or from the goats whose bleating fills the night. This pelt traveled far. Its texture reveals it once belonged to a beaver or even a bear, animals not native to your farm. And that detail opens another view into Viking life. Their bedding. The Viking world was not isolated. Their resourcefulness was part of a vast network of trade. Archaeological evidence and historical records show that Vikings traveled, raided, and traded extensively, bringing goods that transformed their homes. Among the most prized commodities were furs. Reindeer and fox pelts came from northern Scandinavia, while beaver, sable, and marten skins arrived from the forests of present-day Russia and the Baltic. These furs offered more than warmth, they signified status. Owning imported pelts demonstrated a family's wealth and reach, reflecting influence beyond the local community. Fur played a central role in Viking commerce. Conquered lands often paid tribute in pelts, while merchants from as far away as the Middle East prized northern furs for their rarity and insulating properties. The presence of Arabian silver coins in Scandinavian soil illustrates this exchange. Furs moved south, silver moved north. Some furs were even used for bedding, providing comfort in the longhouse. Interestingly, medieval chroniclers note that reindeer hides were sometimes traded for dairy products rather than metal or tools. One can imagine a Viking farmer exchanging goat cheese for a bundle of reindeer hides, proudly spreading them across his family's bed platform. Survival often depended on such unexpected trades. The sensation of these imported furs was distinct from local wool. Sleeker, softer, and better at trapping heat, reindeer hides were particularly valued for their insulating qualities, a fact still recognized in modern Arctic expeditions. For a Viking child, crawling under such a cover meant warmth and protection from drafts creeping through turf walls, a tangible link to distant lands and long trade routes. Scholars debate how widespread these imported furs were. Some argue they were exclusive to wealthy chieftains, while others suggest that trade may have allowed even modest farmers to enjoy foreign pelts on special occasions or during harsh winters. Evidence remains fragmentary, leaving the truth somewhere between rarity and relative accessibility. Regardless of their distribution, furs symbolized prestige and connection. To lie beneath an imported pelt was not merely comfort. It was a statement, a sign of belonging to a wider world. Close your eyes and feel the layers of fur trap your body heat, more effective than any local wool. Around you, the long house stirs with quiet murmurs. Outside, snow piles higher. Inside, you are wrapped in warmth, but also in the invisible threads of trade, conflict, and travel that defined the Viking Age. Even the act of sleeping was part of this network. Silver coins crossed seas, beaver pelts changed hands in forest clearings, caravans moved silently through snowy passes, all converging here in a longhouse where you finally rest. The furs may itch or carry a faint musk, yet they bring the essence of distant lands. In a Scandinavian winter, that could mean the difference between shivering through the night and sleeping until dawn. You adjust under the heavy hides and recognize the longhouse's crowded reality. It is not a private retreat but a hive of life and activity, where every object and every comfort carries the mark of a connected whirl. Benches along the walls weren't filled with neat rows of sleepers, but with bodies pressed together. Grandparents, parents, children, servants, and occasional guests. Everyone lay shoulder to shoulder. The architecture practically required it. With thick walls and limited space, the best way to stay warm was to share air, furs, and sometimes even blankets. Archaeologists examining longhouse remains often note their impressive size. Some halls stretched 20 or 30 meters long. This wasn't for extra comfort. Multiple families, sometimes spanning generations, lived under one roof. It was less a single household and more a microvillage housed in a wooden shell. One saga casually mentions 3 households sharing a single hall, and you can almost sense the crowdedness as you imagine trying to roll over without disturbing someone else. The arrangement was practical. More bodies meant more heat. A dozen people sleeping close together created a shared microclimate. In an era when insulation was unreliable and fires sometimes faltered, this collective warmth could be life-saving. You might not have liked sleeping next to a grumpy uncle or a servant who hadn't bathed in weeks, but their body heat could make the difference between waking up alive or freezing. Folklore even suggests some families position sleepers strategically, tucking children between adults to maximize warmth. Picture being wedged between 2 snoring parents wrapped in cloaks, while cousins and grandparents formed a living barrier against cold air seeping in from the door. The longhouse was less a bedroom and more a human quilt. Every body another patch stitched into survival. Yet this closeness had its drawbacks. Privacy, as we understand it, didn't exist. Every cough, mutter, or restless turn was shared. Quarrels couldn't be whispered. Intimacy was never truly private. For Vikings, though, this was normal. Modern sensibilities might call it suffocating. For them, it was life. Scholars still debate how these shared spaces affected social dynamics. Did constant proximity strengthen family bonds, or did it fuel tension? Some anthropologists argue that tight quarters fostered cooperation. Families enduring nights nose-to-nose learned patience and tolerance. Others point to sagas filled with feuds, suggesting that living stacked together sometimes increased resentment. Both perspectives are plausible, and anyone who's ever been jabbed by an elbow in a crowded room might agree with either. Close your eyes and imagine the sensory experience. The warmth of bodies pressed together, mingled smells of sweat, wool, and smoke, the chorus of snoring filling the hall. A baby fusses in one corner. A dog growls softly in its sleep elsewhere. This wasn't peaceful silence. It was a lively cacophony. And yet, amidst the noise, there was comfort. You were never alone. Excavation sites offer another detail. Benches were sometimes built at slightly different heights, perhaps marking one family's area from another. Imagine shallow ledges stepping up along the wall, each clan claiming a level. This arrangement provided warmth but also reflected hierarchy. Whose bench was nearest the fire, whose lay near the drafty doorway. Sleeping arrangements carried social meaning as strongly as daytime feasts. As you picture this crowded hall, one truth becomes clear. The longhouse wasn't made for individuals. It was made for the group. Survival was a communal effort. Noisy, uncomfortable, but deeply human. People shared not only meals and stories, but their very body heat, night after night, winter after winter. In that closeness, sweaty, chaotic, and warm, they endured together. The Viking longhouse was smoky and undeniably cramped, yet it offered a sense of security. If danger approached, storms tore at the roof, or illness struck, you weren't alone. You were surrounded, deeply connected to your kin. In Viking life, that closeness may have been the most comforting aspect of all. You stir in the dim, smoky air, and the warmth you feel isn't only from the bodies pressed against you. It comes from something larger at the far end of the hall. Behind a wooden partition or low fence, animals shift and exhale warm, moist air, contributing to the foggy interior. Cows, sheep, goats, and even pigs often shared the roof with humans. While it might seem unpleasant today, this mingling of species was an effective heating solution for the Vikings. Archaeological evidence consistently shows longhouses divided into sections. One end for people, one for livestock, often separated by just a waist-high wall. Troughs carved into the floor, post holes for pens, and even preserved layers of compacted manure confirm that these halls doubled as barns. When winter came, animals weren't left outside to freeze. They became living radiators, warming the human side of the house. Picture it. The thick, pungent scent of hay and manure rising through the smoke, hooves shifting, a cow's low rumble from the other side of the partition. At first it may seem intolerable, but then the warmth reaches you, subtle but steady, spreading like a quiet tide under the turf roof. Cows alone generate impressive body heat. Modern studies show a single cow radiates hundreds of watts. Multiply that by a herd, and you have a natural heating system. The Vikings may not have measured watts, but they knew its worth. Livestock were more than food. They were winter companions, supporting human survival with every exhale. There's an amusing side note too. Sagas and folklore sometimes joke about the smell of these arrangements, teasing characters for sleeping near cows. The humor hints that everyone recognized both the necessity and unpleasantness of the setup. Imagine rolling over, pulling your cloak over your nose, grumbling about the neighbor's goat all night. Yet when storms raged outside, every warm breath from the animals was a blessing. Scholars still debate how integrated the human and animal sections were. Some reconstructions show clear barriers with neatly penned animals, while others suggest only symbolic divisions, allowing goats to wander close to bedding. With no intact interior surviving, we can only imagine both possibilities. Sometimes orderly, sometimes chaotic, but always filled with smells and sounds modern bedrooms would never endure. Animals didn't just influence temperature. They shaped sleep patterns. You'd hear hooves shuffle, hay being chewed, snorts and sighs as animals settled. Children may have found comfort in this rhythm, while adults could curse when a restless sheep startled everyone at midnight. Sleep was never fully silent. Some researchers argue that decomposing manure on the far side of the hall might have produced additional warmth. It sounds humorous, but decomposition does release heat. Whether noticeable or just a byproduct is still debated, leaving us to wonder if those smelly piles actually kept children's toes from freezing. Beyond providing warmth the livestock brought, this keeps your original imagery, flow, and content, while slightly simplifying sentence structures, reducing repetition, and keeping a neutral professional tone. Another form of security existed. Keeping your animals inside protected them from predators and theft. In a society where a family's wealth was measured in cows and sheep, guarding them overnight was essential. You and your goats shared the smoky air, not for enjoyment, but for survival. Settling deeper into your furs in this imagined longhouse, the warmth around you feels layered. Fire flickers at the center, families breathe along benches, and animals exhale at the far end. The hall becomes a shared ecosystem of heat. The smell might make you wrinkle your nose, yet it brings relief. In the frozen north, every warm breath mattered. As the night unfolds, one thing becomes clear. Uninterrupted 8-hour sleep was not expected here. That belongs to the modern clock, not the Viking world. Rest came in segments, rising and lying down according to the fire, chores, and the rhythms of daily life. You stir at midnight, notice someone tending the embers, hear another leaving for outside, and realize sleep was communal but staggered. Historical sources and ethnographic studies suggest pre-industrial sleep was often segmented. People slept for a few hours, woke in the night, and returned to a second sleep before dawn. Vikings likely followed a similar pattern, since tending the hearth required waking. Fires needed feeding, smoke holes adjusting, and animals checking. In the long, dark Scandinavian winter, waking at intervals was part of survival. Imagine it. Half the hall snores while shadowy figures move quietly. One kneels at the fire, adding a log. Another leads a goat outside. A third sits awake, thinking or praying. Sleep here is not fixed. It ebbs and flows. Some sagas describe midnight moments where characters are awake, reflecting or conversing, not as interruptions but as natural pauses in rest. For a Viking family, nighttime was a shifting landscape of dozing, waking, tending, and dreaming. Picture a child waking to hear a story before returning to sleep. The sagas may have originated in these in-between hours, when half the hall was awake, voices blending with the crackle of fire. Scholars debate how consistent segmented sleep was. Some argue it was nearly universal before artificial lighting, others caution that evidence is limited. Did Vikings follow this pattern every night or only in long winter darkness? The answer likely lies between speculation and likelihood, but the demands of fire tending and livestock care make it plausible. Now imagine stirring from a dream. Your body is warm under furs, lungs irritated by smoke. You sit up and see someone else awake. There's comfort in that shared acknowledgement that the night is communal. You toss a log on the fire, perhaps whisper to a god or ancestor, then lie back, waiting for sleep to return. Viking nights were never silent. They were punctuated by the scrape of wood, the creak of benches, and the movement of animals. Even stepping outside into the cold for relief became part of this nocturnal rhythm. Broke the monotony. Your eyes catch the aurora swirling above before you retreat back inside. These interruptions embed themselves into memory, turning each night into a woven fabric rather than a blank slate. Consider how this changes your sense of time. In the longhouse, darkness was not an empty void to endure, but a canvas stretched across shifting hours. People drifted between wakefulness and sleep like fish in a current. This may explain why Vikings measured their days not by minutes but by tasks. Feeding animals, stoking fires, sharing stories, and returning to sleep. You naturally fall into this rhythm. First sleep, waking moments, second sleep. You breathe with the hall, rising and falling with its pulse. The modern idea of a private, uninterrupted night disappears. In its place is a communal flow, a cycle of warmth, vigilance, and fragmented dreams that somehow still feel complete. As night deepens, your body rests, but your ears remain alert. In the crowded longhouse, silence never truly arrives. The air is thick with overlapping sounds, a chorus of humans and animals echoing through smoky beams. You hear songs, murmurs, snores, the creak of timbers, the cough of someone whose lungs are full of soot. For Vikings, this was the soundtrack of sleep. Archaeologists cannot excavate sound, but sagas and ethnographic comparisons offer clues. After the evening meal, as families settled, someone might recite a verse or saga fragment, letting words drift into the dark. These were not formal performances, but nightly habits to fill hours before the first wave of sleep. A chieftain's hall might resonate with tales of Odin, Thor, or local heroes, while a farmer's home might hum with whispered lullabies. Stories and songs were as much a part of the night as the straw beneath your back. Once voices faded, snoring took over. Picture dozens of bodies packed on benches, cloaks drawn tight, airways clogged with smoke and fatigue. The resulting sound must have been immense. Ethnographers studying traditional Scandinavian farmhouses describe them as barns of sound, where silence was rare. You lie pressed among relatives, the snoring as loud as the storm outside. Even sagas joke about loud sleepers, characters mocked for thunderous nighttime noises, a humor that survives because it was so common. Snoring was inevitable in a room full of exhausted bodies with poor ventilation. You might mutter at your neighbor's rattling throat, only to recognize you do the same when asleep. Then there were the animals. Cows shifting in stalls, goats sighing, pigs grunting in dreams. Every noise echoed through the timber walls. Some scholars suggest this constant animal background was oddly comforting, a sign that the family's livestock, their wealth, was safe. Others see it as maddening, a reminder that the longhouse was as much a barn as a home. Both views hold depending on tolerance. Consider the fire again. As logs burned, they popped and hissed, sending sparks snapping into the gloom. The hearth was never quiet, a restless companion. A shift of logs could wake a light sleeper, rippling through the hall and keeping night perpetually unsettled. Modern readers often imagine sleep as private and serene, but for Vikings, it was different. Sleep was social, woven from every voice, cough, and animal breath. Privacy was a dream submerged beneath the constant hum of life within timber walls. Did people find this exhausting? Or, having never known silence, was it simply normal? Known silence. Did they drift into sleep effortlessly, minds calmed by the familiar hum of shared life? One thing is clear. Sagas often describe evenings filled with conversation. Heroes boasted, women sang, children listened. Noise wasn't just tolerated. It was expected, an integral part of daily life. The transition from spoken stories to snoring was natural, a continuum of voices moving from wakefulness to slumber. You might smile at the thought that lungs which praised Thor an hour earlier now rumbled like a bull in sleep. Scholars still debate how these constant sounds shaped Viking culture. Some suggest it built resilience. If you could sleep through bleating goats and snoring uncles, you could endure almost anything. Others argue it strengthened storytelling traditions. Long nights awake in the dark made tales central to community identity. Evidence supports both ideas. Listening to the imagined longhouse, you can sense both truths. Now, let your ears fill with that imagined chorus. The rhythm of breathing, creaking beams, occasional cries of children, the deep bass of a settling cow. These sounds form a harsh but comforting lullaby. For a Viking, sleep wasn't escape. It was immersion, a nightly surrender to the noisy, smoky heart of the longhouse. As hours pass, you realize warmth wasn't only from fire, furs, or bodies pressed close. It came from within, from what you ate before bed. The Viking diet, rich in grains, meat, and dairy, stoked the body's internal fire. A belly full of porridge or roasted mutton generated a slow burn, carrying energy through the night. Without it, even thick reindeer hides couldn't keep you warm. Archaeological studies of latrines and refuse heaps reveal what sustained these nights. Barley and rye bread, thick pea and bean soups, lamb or pork stews, and abundant dairy from cows and goats. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was insulation. You can almost taste a honey-sweetened barley gruel, heavy in the belly, warming you as you curl on straw bedding. A curious detail emerges from bones found at Viking sites. Marks show marrow was a prized midnight snack. Picture a child gnawing on a roasted bone, greasy fingers tucked into furs. Practical, not glamorous. Fat provided concentrated calories, keeping warmth long after the fire dimmed. Researchers still wonder how evenly food was shared. Did wealthier families enjoy meat-heavy meals while poorer households subsisted on grains and thin soups? Evidence suggests disparity. Some graves show rich animal proteins, others mostly plants. One family could sleep stuffed and warm, while a neighbor went to bed cold and hungry in the same village. The effect of diet on sleep is immediate to imagine. A full belly relaxes the body, limbs heavy, warmth radiating from within. Hunger makes the cold sharper, every draft more piercing. Winter feasts, often timed with Yule, were survival strategies as much as celebrations. They filled bellies when warmth was most critical. Picture the scene. A hearty stew simmers in the central hearth. Families settle onto benches, bellies full, warmth spreading through them. The smoky longhouse may be drafty, but inner fires glow. Animals, fed hay and scraps, contribute to the hall's heat. Sleep comes easier when hunger doesn't gnaw at the ribs. Saga literature adds another detail. Heroes often eat enormous meals before resting, as if appetite itself were a mark of strength. One tale describes, a man devours entire sides of meat before collapsing into a snoring heap. Exaggerated? Almost certainly. Yet it captures a cultural truth. Eating well meant sleeping well, both signs of health and vitality. Historians still debate how much diet helped endure the cold. Some argue that high-calorie foods were essential in the subarctic, acting like internal insulation. Others counter that clothing and bedding mattered far more. No amount of food could protect a body from icy drafts without wool and fur. The debate continues, leaving you to weigh both views while imagining a bite of barley bread. The sensory image is vivid. The smoky stew lingers on your tongue. Your belly feels heavy. Warmth spreads from your core to your fingertips. You curl into furs, press closer to your neighbor, and sigh. Tonight, food is as much a blanket as the hides over your shoulders. In the Viking world, survival wasn't just about what covered you, it was also about what filled you. Every bite of stew, gulp of milk, or sliver of marrow contributed to the warmth of the longhouse, as much as the logs and turf around you. Your belly full, someone hands you a horn brimming with ale. Food warms the body, but drink does something different. Vikings brewed beer, ale, and mead not only for feasts but also for everyday life, including the nightly struggle against cold. One swallow flushes your cheeks and sends a warm trickle through your chest, almost making the cold disappear. Archaeological finds, brewing vats, fermentation pits, and residue on clay vessels show alcohol was ever present in Viking homes. Ale, brewed from barley or oats with herbs, was common. Mead, the legendary honey wine, was rarer but highly prized. These drinks were caloric, mildly intoxicating, and, above all, warming. The sensation was enough to help families drift to sleep under smoky roofs. Yet a curious contradiction exists. Alcohol dilates blood vessels, giving the illusion of warmth, but it also accelerates heat loss. Modern medicine warns that drinking before bed in a freezing hall could be dangerous. Vikings may not have understood this scientifically, but they likely noticed the effects, some waking sweaty, others shivering more. In a world of cold nights, immediate comfort often outweighed long-term risk. Sagas provide a humorous glimpse. Men who drank too heavily sometimes fell asleep in awkward places, on benches even near the fire. Imagine being woken at midnight to drag a tipsy uncle away from smoldering embers before his cloak caught flame. Stories like these suggest it happened often enough to become a memorable anecdote. Alcohol wasn't just indulgence. These drinks provided essential calories when every bit of energy counted. A horn of ale could be as filling as a small meal, helping sustain warmth from within. Sweet mead, thick and honeyed, acted like syrup, offering fast-burning fuel. You imagine lying down after a drink, warmth coursing through you, dreams arriving sooner. Scholars still debate how widely alcohol was consumed nightly. Some claim ale was a daily drink, often replacing unsafe water. Others note that brewing required valuable grain and honey, so households likely rationed carefully. Archaeological evidence supports both scenarios. Grand feasting halls where mead flowed freely and small farms where ale was precious, consumed sparingly on cold nights. The sensory impression is vivid. The tang of fermented barley on your tongue, honey's sweetness lingering on your lips, and a gentle dizziness as you lean back against your furs. Around you, the noise shifts. Voices swell for a moment, laughter echoes, then slowly dissolves into uneven snores. The drink softens the chaos of the hall, blurring the crowd and dulling the sting of smoke, making the closeness of so many bodies easier to tolerate. Still, the dangers remain. One cup too many, and you might sleep through your turn at the fire. Worse, you could wander into the livestock stalls or collapse too close to the hearth. Old stories warn against drinking heavily before sleep. Tales meant to remind people that overindulgence could carry real consequences. So, as you settle beneath your cloak, warmed by stew and mead, you're reminded of the double nature of Viking drink. It soothed, nourished, and relaxed, yet it also left you exposed on the harshest nights. You drift towards sleep, face warm, stomach content, realizing that survival could taste like barley and honey. Sharp, sweet, and comforting. Your head still buzzes faintly from that last horn, but when you turn onto your side, you notice something simple and meaningful. The wool cloak you wore all day hasn't been folded away. Instead, it's draped over you, serving as a blanket. In the Viking world, clothing was more than attire. It was protection against unforgiving weather, both in daylight and in the dark. When fires dimmed and the longhouse creaked under winter snow, cloaks and tunics took on double duty as bedding. Archaeology has uncovered countless fragments of woolen textiles from graves and bogs throughout Scandinavia, many astonishingly well preserved. Dense twill, tablet-woven trim, and rough homespun cloth all point to wool's essential role in daily life. Sheep were vital not just for meat and milk, but for fleece that could be spun into endlessly practical fabric. Historians consistently emphasize this reality. Without wool, Viking nights would have been far harsher. Wool had a remarkable property. Its fibers held heat even when damp. That was crucial in a climate where melting snow seeped into everything, and clothing was constantly exposed to moisture. Picture pulling your day cloak tighter around you, its coarse surface scratching slightly but locking in precious warmth. These cloaks weren't ornamental the way later medieval garments became. They were sturdy lengths of fabric, fastened with brooches heavy enough to stand up to the wind, and thick enough to serve as bedding indoors. There's an interesting detail here. Some higher-status graves contain cloaks lined with imported furs. This hints at a layered clothing system, wool on the outside for resilience, fur beneath for insulation. Sleeping under such a cloak meant wrapping yourself in a blend of local craftsmanship and far-reaching trade, showing how necessity and style intertwined. You imagine drawing one of these cloaks over your shoulders, the wool rough against your jaw, the fur lining soft and warm against your skin. But what about everyday people? Did every farmer or thrall enjoy such comforts? Scholars still debate how evenly high-quality textiles were distributed. Some believe wool cloaks were widespread, though their weave and weight varied. Others argue that the finest fabrics belonged to the wealthy, while poorer households slept under thinner, rougher cloth, relying on straw or animal skins for added warmth. The evidence remains incomplete, leaving room to picture a full range, from chieftains wrapped in layered cloaks to servants trying to stay warm beneath worn, threadbare coverings. Beyond cloaks, tunics and trousers usually stayed on through the night. The concept of dedicated sleepwear didn't exist. Day clothes simply became night clothes, preserving as much warmth as possible. Archaeological finds include heavy wool tunics, sometimes belted, sometimes plain pullovers, that would have doubled as sleepwear by default. Imagine lying down fully dressed, boots removed but everything else unchanged, as much for warmth as for practicality. One small piece of folklore suggests that women sometimes spread their shawls or headscarves over children for extra warmth. Picture a mother unwrapping her woven scarf at night and placing it gently over a child. Another layer in a world where every scrap of fabric mattered. You pull a cloak gently over your toddler, using it as a makeshift blanket. These small adjustments remind you that survival had nothing to do with comfort. It depended on making use of every bit of fabric available. Now close your eyes and focus on the physical sensations. The wool rubs against your neck, its weight resting on your chest. A faint trace of lanolin still lingers. Your tunic itches along your arms, yet the warmth it provides is unmistakable. The cloak above you blocks the cold drifting through the gaps in the turf walls, and for a moment you breathe easier, thankful for the steady heat held within the sheep's fleece. The social meaning of cloaks also stayed with people in the dark. Receiving a cloak was more than a gift. It represented protection, status, and at times closeness. Sagas mention warriors offering cloaks to companions, gestures carrying significance well beyond the material. In a longhouse, that same cloak might later be shared as bedding, adding layers of meaning, loyalty, survival, and warmth. You consider whether someone lying beside you once wore their cloak into battle, and now it rests across both of you as you sleep. Historians are still unsure how often clothing was washed. Some evidence suggests it happened infrequently because wool's natural oils helped repel moisture and dirt. This means the cloak warming you likely carries strong scents of smoke, sweat, and lanolin. But for the Vikings, this wasn't unpleasant. These familiar smells represented daily life. The scent was not viewed as unclean. It was a sense of belonging, survival woven into every strand. Think also about the cycle of reuse. The same cloak used proudly at a daytime feast, draped over shoulders, could become a blanket at night, shared with children. Fabric was never wasted. It held too much value. Even worn, thinning pieces were turned into padding, patches, or filling for bedding. Every shred played a part in the nightly effort to keep out the cold. A clearer picture forms. The Viking longhouse wasn't stocked with specially made blankets. Instead, it relied on versatile garments that shifted roles easily. A cloak fastened at the shoulder during the day was unfastened and laid across your body at night. A tunic carrying the scent of sweat and smoke kept you alive when the fire grew low. The boundary between clothing and bedding faded until it no longer existed. You settled deeper beneath the wool, its weight pressing gently, the fur trim brushing your chin. Luxury doesn't come to mind, endurance does. Each thread carries memories of sheep grazing in summer, of women spinning yarn by firelight, of looms creaking in smoky halls. Every fiber is survival made real. And as you drift toward sleep, you understand that in the Viking world, warmth didn't come from clean, freshly tucked sheets. It came from the very garments you wore, day after day, tightly woven against the cold. You blink awake in the faint light of the dying embers and feel a small body pressed against your side. It isn't accidental. Viking children were often placed at the center of the bed, not just for comfort but as a purposeful way to protect them. The smallest, most vulnerable to the cold, were nestled between adults, surrounded by layered warmth. It was the Longhouses' version of central heating, children positioned like glowing coals, kept warm by the surrounding family. Excavations of Viking graves where children lie beside adults, wrapped in shared bedding goods, reflect this practice. It was more than symbolic. It mirrored how they had slept in life, connected, sheltered, upheld by the warmth of older, stronger bodies. Archaeologists, examining soil traces of decayed wood and fur, can map the arrangement. Wide benches built for several people, with smaller impressions tucked between them. It reveals a way of living centered not on privacy but on survival through closeness. Close your eyes and picture it now. Your child curls into your chest, carrying the scent of smoke and wool, small hands tucked under your cloak. Another child presses against your partner, their legs touching yours. The adults form a protective ring, a living barrier against the cold air. Any modern parent would understand the instinct to keep children close, but here it was driven even more by necessity. Without that shared human warmth, insulation was essential, and without it, a child might not survive the night. One strong piece of evidence comes from saga literature, which occasionally mentions the central position of children in shared sleeping setups. Although these references are limited and indirect, they support what archaeology already suggests. Vikings understood how harsh the cold could be, so they increased their chances of staying warm by keeping their families close together. There is also an interesting detail from later Scandinavian folk traditions. In some areas, children reportedly slept crosswise, positioned perpendicular to adults so that several small bodies could fit on one bench. Imagine that arrangement. Adults lying lengthwise with children placed across them like bars in a fence. It may seem messy, but it efficiently preserved heat, turning a simple wooden platform into an organized system of warmth. Historians still debate how consistent this practice really was. Some believe saga references and folk customs show a long tradition, an approach where families routinely place children in the middle. Others argue the arrangement likely differed from home to home, especially if benches were wider and allowed a bit more separation. The evidence remains incomplete, and academic discussions continue. Still, inside a smoky longhouse where cold air slipped beneath turf walls, the reasoning feels straightforward. The chill loses strength when bodies stay close. Now consider the emotional side. Children falling asleep with a parent's heartbeat in their ear, comforted by shared warmth. Adults resting more easily, knowing their children were protected not only by layers of fur but also by physical closeness. In a time when childhood survival was far from certain, that nightly connection must have offered real reassurance. But comfort did not mean perfect ease. You shift under a cloak, and a child's knee presses into your ribs. Another rolls over, brushing your face. The benches were narrow, space was tight, and quiet moments were regularly disrupted by elbows, turns, and snores. Even so, parents accepted this because the alternative, placing a child near the edge where drafts struck hardest, was not an option. A curious find from a burial site in Norway revealed a child laid to rest with a small fur blanket neatly folded. Was it symbolic? Did it represent the family's routine of giving extra care to children at night? We cannot be certain, but it suggests that bedding for the young held special significance, both practical and possibly spiritual. Keeping a child warm meant safeguarding the future of the family. The sensory picture becomes clearer as you imagine the scene. You feel heavy furs pressed over everyone, the warm movements of a child beside you, and the shared breaths forming a small pocket of air under the covers. The space could feel stuffy, damp with sweat and thick with human smell, yet it also offered security, a shield against the freezing darkness outside. From a social viewpoint, these sleeping arrangements pulled families into stronger bonds. Modern concepts like nurseries or separate children's rooms were unknown. Sleep was something done together, and this closeness deepened affection and dependence, while also heightening awareness of vulnerability. Picture a parent lying awake, hand resting on a child's chest to feel steady breathing, offering a silent prayer to the gods that everyone would survive another night. Scholars continue to debate whether such close sleeping patterns influenced Viking parenting. Some anthropologists suggest it strengthened relationships across generations, with grandparents, parents, and children sharing the same space nightly. Others believe the lack of rest may have created tension, shortening tempers. Either way, the structure of the home required closeness, and the cold reinforced it. Now allow yourself to sink completely into this setting. The bench creaks under your family's combined weight. Children shift, adults adjust, cloaks move softly, and someone stirs the fire so that it briefly glows across tired, warm faces. They are sweaty, crowded, worn out, but alive. That is the reality of Viking nights. They were not calm retreats from hardship. They were challenges met with shared warmth and resilience. Warmth, shared bodies, and human connection filled every night from dusk until dawn. As your eyes close again in this imagined longhouse, you accept the discomfort because you know why it exists. Children sleep in the center, adults stay along the sides. Its arrangement is a practical layout for survival, a nightly pattern shaped into benches and bedding. When morning arrives and frost still grips the world outside, you rise understanding that staying close together was essential. The longhouse becomes active once more, but now with gentler sounds. Murmurs, soft laughter, the quiet shift of cloaks being pulled tighter. You begin to notice that physical closeness itself was part of enduring harsh nights. Love and marriage in the Viking Age were not only social structures. They also served as nightly agreements of warmth. Sleeping beside a partner offered more than companionship. It provided a shield against cold drafts. Archaeology cannot capture emotion, yet it shows couples buried together with bedding items, cloaks, or furs placed over them. These material clues, supported by saga references, reveal how sleep and partnership were connected. Marriage wasn't simply about family lines or property. In the depths of winter, it meant having someone to lean against when the fire weakened. You pull your imagined cloak closer and feel the heat of another person beside you. The cold feels less severe in a hall where privacy was minimal. Couples found small moments of closeness under shared furs and whispered conversations. Was it comfortable? Likely not. Children snoring nearby, animals shifting in their pens, smoke irritating the eyes. But it was the only place where warmth and tenderness could coexist. One well-documented detail found in saga literature highlights the marriage bed as a space of negotiation and alliance. The Icelandic sagas occasionally describe who shared beds with whom, not only in the literal sense but as a symbol of honor and household structure. Bed placement mattered. It determined who received warmth near the fire and who had to endure the colder edges. A curious tradition appears in some accounts. During certain wedding ceremonies, the bride was led to the marital bench inside the longhouse instead of a separate room. Imagine the entire household observing as the couple's sleeping spot was formally designated, fully aware that the same bench would later serve as their nightly shelter against the cold. Privacy wasn't the goal, practical survival was. Scholars continue to debate how much privacy Viking couples truly had. Some believe the crowded conditions made seclusion nearly impossible, suggesting that intimacy was simply part of community life. Others propose that curtains, partitions, or animal skins hung from beams may have created small sections. The reality likely varied from hall to hall. Some may have had modest nooks, while others left couples exposed to the sights and sounds of family members. The sensory scene is easy to imagine. You and your partner curl closely together, sharing warmth and breath. Your cloaks overlap, your limbs intertwine, and between snores and coughs, you exchange quiet words meant only for each other. Around you, the longhouse continues its routine, but within your shared space, you build a pocket of heat, both physical and emotional. There is a gentle form of care here, even in challenging conditions. Picture a farmer laying his heavy wool cloak over himself and his wife, making sure she is covered before he settles in. Or imagine a woman pulling her fur wrap tighter around her husband after he tends the fire, acknowledging his efforts with warmth. These small nightly actions were as vital as heroic deeds, helping families survive winters that would overwhelm individuals on their own. But closeness wasn't limited to married couples. In households where widows, widowers, or unmarried adults lived, bed sharing often extended beyond romantic relationships. Companionship in sleep could cross lines of age, kinship, and responsibility. An elderly grandmother might sleep beside a granddaughter, not only out of affection but the warmth of bodies kept everyone alive. Servants might share benches with children, filling gaps and creating a wall of heat. This arrangement blurred social boundaries, showing that survival depended on cooperation more than strict propriety. One unusual note appears in medieval Christian sources criticizing northern peoples. Some clerics complained that men and women lay together in huts without separation. Likely exaggerated, this critique still hints at a reality that shocked outsiders. Viking intimacy was not hidden behind walls. It was visible, audible, and part of communal life. For the Vikings, this openness may have built resilience. Couples learned to appreciate quiet moments, finding warmth not in isolation but amid the bustle of the hall. Love existed alongside bleeding goats and restless children. Perhaps this made it more enduring, less dependent on setting, and more rooted in presence. Historians still debate how this shaped Viking ideas of marriage and family. Did constant visibility encourage loyalty and transparency, or did it create jealousy and tension? The sagas reflect both. devoted couples surviving hardship, and whispered tales of betrayal in the smoky darkness. The ambiguity is fitting. The longhouse was both shelter and pressure cooker, amplifying every bond and fracture. Imagine lying there, cloaks layered, the weight of furs pressing you close, smoke stinging your eyes, children coughing nearby. But your partner's hand brushes yours, and for a moment, the cold is forgotten. Intimacy in this world was measured not in candles or roses, but in shared warmth, whispered words, and holding on through the night. In the Viking longhouse, love was not grand gestures but nightly rituals of sharing heat, shielding each other from drafts, and finding connection in the crowded, smoky space. Even in a communal setting, couples carved a small circle of warmth for themselves. As the fire dies down and you shift on the bench, you notice another nightly task: refreshing the bedding. Straw mattresses were not permanent, they were fluffed, renewed, or replaced. Without this, the simple material would rot, flatten, and harbor pests. Maintaining straw was about comfort, hygiene, survival, and household pride. Archaeological digs reveal thick layers of straw mixed with ash and animal hair on longhouse floors, showing how bedding was layered and refreshed seasonally. Straw insulated against the damp earth, cushioned bodies, and absorbed some smoke and grease, but it had to be changed. Old straw smelled sour, damp with sweat or spilled mead, making sleep difficult. Medieval sources outside Scandinavia note the phrase, "shake down the bed," meaning fluffing and refreshing straw. Vikings likely did the same, though with less ceremony. Picture a woman in late autumn dragging bundles of straw, spreading them across benches, grimly laughing as she imagines these golden stalks turning brown and broken by spring. Interestingly, in some northern traditions lasting into modern times, fresh straw was laid at midwinter festivals. Not just practical, but symbolic, representing renewal. To sleep on new straw at Yule meant welcoming the year's turning, inviting good fortune, and ensuring months of comfortable sleep. Was this Viking in origin? Scholars cannot confirm, but the echoes are striking. Now let your senses take over as you roll across the straw, the stiff stalks brushing your arms. The faintly sweet scent of dry grass mixes with the heavier musk of furs. Fresh straw carries a comfort of its own, earthy, rustic, and cleaner than the sour odor of older bedding. It rustles under your movement, like whispers in the dark, reminding you that this is the same material your animals chew. Even with careful upkeep, straw never lasted long. Families would replace it several times a year whenever infestations became too much. Archaeologists have discovered layers of ash intentionally scattered in bedding areas, likely meant to kill pests or dry damp straw. Imagine sprinkling hearth ashes across your bed before adding fresh stalks, a form of housekeeping that blurred the line between dirt and remedy. Scholars still debate whether straw bedding was universal in longhouses or if wealthier households sometimes used alternatives such as down or imported textiles. Elite burials occasionally include feathers or finer materials, suggesting some luxury. But for most people, straw was the standard, cheap, plentiful, and for a time comfortable. It functioned as the mattress of the masses, scratching and rustling but keeping sleepers off bare planks. Refreshing straw also created a rhythm in daily life. Children might fetch bundles, servants spread it evenly, elders shake out cloaks before laying them down again. Every part of this process was communal, a reminder that survival was never solitary. Maintaining beds was as vital as tending the fire or feeding the animals. Neglect it, and everyone itched, coughed, and complained. Imagine the sounds when the straw was new. Families settling in, the rustling of bodies across the hall, gradually quieting as the weeks passed, until only silence and dust remained. Then fresh bundles arrived, and the familiar chorus of rustling filled the night again. These small rituals marked the passage of time, connecting daily life to seasonal cycles. Pests were a constant challenge. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs thrived in straw bedding. Entomologists studying Viking Age graves have identified flea species preserved in burial textiles, confirming that itching at night was universal. You can picture a Viking tossing under furs, not from cold, but from crawling bites. Fresh straw helped, but it never solved the problem. The battle against pests was endless. Rolling onto your side, you feel the mixture beneath you. Crackling stalks, ash drying the damp, and hidden insects waiting for darkness. It is uncomfortable and imperfect, but far better than lying directly on planks or soil, which would bring colder, damper, and more painful nights. Straw was never luxurious, but it tipped the balance toward survival. This nightly routine, refreshing straw, spreading furs, shaking out cloaks, was as much a ritual as eating or praying. It represented small, continuous labor to make life in a smoky hall livable. Despite the inevitable itching and complaints, there is relief. Fresh straw offered the hope of a somewhat easier night. Pulling your cloak higher, you still twitch and scratch. This time, it isn't the straw. It's the uninvited guests. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs thriving in the warmth of Viking homes, as they did in nearly every pre-modern society. Cold might not disturb your rest, but itching certainly did. Life in a timber hall was never about perfect comfort. It was about enduring the constant presence of tiny creatures living closer to your skin than you wanted. Archaeologists have found direct evidence of this irritation. Excavations of Viking graves often uncover textile fragments with fossilized flea remains or lice eggs clinging to hair. One study from York, a Viking city, even unearthed combs heavily infested with head lice, and bedding layers filled with flea droppings. These were not rare occurrences. Pests were everywhere. Everyone itched, warriors, farmers, even chieftains slept with fleas hopping over their furs. The longhouse offered enough warmth for humans to thrive, and equally for insects. Now imagine the sensation. You drift into sleep only to be awakened by an itch on your ankle. You scratch, roll over, and another bite pricks your shoulder. The straw shifts as you move, and others do the same. Small movements ripple through the benches. The hall breathes, snores, coughs, and scratches. In many ways, fleas were the true chorus of Viking nights. Here's a curious detail that might make you grimly smile. Double-sided combs were among the most common personal items in Viking burials. One side had wide teeth for grooming hair, the other fine teeth for catching lice. Picture a family huddled by the fire in the evening, not just sharing stories, but also combing each other's hair, flicking lice into the flames. Hygiene rituals doubled as bonding time, perhaps even accompanied by laughter, as someone teased another for hosting a flea circus in their hair. But pests were not limited to hair. They infested the furs and blankets meant for warmth. Animal hides offered comfort but also perfect habitats for fleas. In winter, when bedding went unwashed, infestations worsened. Ethnographers studying later Scandinavian farmhouses noted children joked about night fleas keeping them awake, implying that itching was an accepted part of life. Sleep meant enduring the tiny stings as much as the cold drafts. Scholars debate how much these pests affected health. Some argue that constant irritation led to skin infections or disrupted sleep, increasing vulnerability to illness. Others suggest that while bothersome, people adapted and communities learned to coexist with them. The evidence remains inconclusive, but the debate highlights how central these creatures were to daily life. Consider the sensory environment this created. The smell of smoke and wool clinging to cloaks, the heavy warmth of furs, the faint scratching of someone across the hall dragging nails over their skin. Even animals weren't spared. Cows and goats brought their own insects indoors, adding to the collective buzz. One might laugh in frustration, realizing that the only creatures truly thriving in the longhouse were the fleas. An unusual archaeological note involves ash sprinkled into bedding areas. Scholars suggest ashes were used to dry damp straw and deter pests. Was it effective? Perhaps somewhat. Imagine a mother tossing handfuls of gray dust over bedding before layering fresh straw, hoping to keep fleas at bay, a primitive insecticide born of necessity. Other folk remedies existed as well. Later traditions mention placing pungent herbs like tansy or juniper in bedding, both for scent and to repel insects. Did Vikings do the same? There's no direct proof, but given their knowledge of local plants, it's plausible. Picture falling asleep on straw laced with crushed juniper, its sharp scent mingling with smoke and damp fur. Did it help or just mask the itch? Historians remain uncertain. The emotional toll was real. Nights were rarely fully restful. Parents may have spent long hours comforting children crying from bites. Couples whispered curses at fleas under the blankets. Even hardened warriors, accustomed to icy seas and battlefields, groaned at the indignity of scratching through the night. Still, fleas and lice became part of daily life. Combs were as essential as swords. Fireside rituals as common as storytelling. To be Viking was to be itchy and to accept that discomfort as another daily battle, alongside the cold, the smoke, and the pests. None could be. Even with all the discomforts endured, you shift under your furs, scratching your arm and sighing, and notice something deeper. The Viking night was full of imperfections. Warmth came with smoke, companionship with noise, and bedding with fleas. Yet, people still slept, still dreamed, and still woke ready to sail, farm, and fight. Sleep was never about comfort. It was about endurance. In enduring, the Vikings outlasted both the winter and the biting fleas that thrived in its shadow. Tonight, the smoke curls thicker, and beneath the hides, you sense something beyond physical warmth. For the Vikings, sleep was more than a bodily need, it had spiritual and symbolic weight. The hearth, the furs, and even the straw beneath carried meanings beyond mere insulation. Warmth was sacred, a gift connected to gods, ancestors, and unseen protectors. Archaeological discoveries and saga passages hint at this invisible dimension of Viking life. Small household shrines, carved figures, and offerings near hearths indicate that fire was more than fuel. It housed divine guardians. Tending the fire meant tending to the spirit of the home. Each glowing ember symbolized life, not just heat. One can imagine someone whispering a prayer as they placed a log on the fire, asking Thor to protect the household from frost or Freya to watch over sleeping children. Hearths were closely linked to land spirits, thought to linger near homes, offering protection or punishing neglect. A family that maintained the fire and hall invited safety, while a cold hearth could bring misfortune. Survival rituals were therefore also acts of devotion. Later Scandinavian folk traditions add another layer. Iron objects like knives or keys were sometimes placed near children's bedding to ward off evil. Whether this was done during the Viking Age is uncertain, but it's easy to envision a mother tucking an iron amulet under the straw to shield her child from spirits of frost or disease. Scholars debate how formal these beliefs were. Some see them as casual domestic superstitions, quietly passed within families. Others as structured rituals tied to seasonal festivals, like renewing bedding and blessing fires. Likely, the truth is a mix of both. Practical acts combined with whispered prayers, unrecorded yet deeply felt. The sensory dimension of these beliefs is vivid. Picture lying on straw, the fire crackling nearby, while a grandmother murmurs charms against frost spirits. Smoke becomes protective rather than irritating. Furs feel heavier, not just warm, but meaningful, as if ancestors press close through the hides. The night blends endurance with spiritual reassurance. Archaeological evidence supports this connection. Graves often contain bedding. Children with tiny fur blankets, adults with cloaks or full bedding sets. Such inclusions suggest warmth mattered beyond life itself. Sleeping without furs or straw in the afterlife would have been unimaginable. Survival and spirituality were tightly intertwined, showing how deeply Vikings connected warmth to body and soul. Dreams also played a role. In a smoky hall, waking partially from segmented sleep, dreams could feel vivid and real. Sagas describe visions of ancestors or gods appearing at night. Smoke and flickering firelight may have intensified these experiences. A Viking might awaken convinced a spirit had spoken, offering guidance on harvest or warning of danger. Even restless nights, then, became moments of both physical endurance and spiritual insight. Channels to the divine. Here's an unusual point. Some scholars argue that the harsh environment, smoke, pests, cramped space, may have intensified the spiritual dimension of the night. Discomfort blurred the line between waking and dreaming, making it feel as if unseen beings lingered in the rafters. Did Vikings perceive frost not just as weather, but as a spirit pressing against the walls? Did each gust of cold air seem like a rival force challenging the hearth's warmth? This question lies at the intersection of anthropology and history. Now, imagine yourself in that setting. You lie wrapped in your cloak, child pressed against you, listening to the fire hiss. You murmur a few words, not fully understanding them, but because everyone does. These words are a shield, like the cloak, the straw, the walls. Your warmth is both physical and spiritual. You believe it wards off danger. In that belief, you find comfort. The Viking night was never just a struggle of cold against fire. It was a negotiation between human endurance and the unseen forces around you. The Longhouse became a sanctuary not only of wood and turf but of spirit and song. Warmth was a gift, and in Viking culture, gifts always implied reciprocity. You fed the fire and it fed you. You honored the spirits, and they protected you from the frost. As you close your eyes in this imagined hall, smoke thick around you, you sense more than mere discomfort. You feel the invisible presence of gods and ancestors, hovering like shadows above the rafters, breathing warmth into the Longhouse. Sleeping through a Viking winter required trust, not just in fire and furs, but in unseen hands guarding the night. The Longhouse quiets again, though not into silence. Embers glow low, shadows stretch long, and a subtle ritual unfolds by the fire. Someone crouches, stirring the coals, hands dusted in. Gray powder. They aren't building a new fire yet, but tending the existing one, coaxing it to last until dawn. Charcoal, ash, and embers were essential tools for carrying fire through the endless dark. Without them, every morning would begin with the harsh shock of starting from scratch. Archaeological hearths often show thick layers of ash, not just from burning, but from intentional banking. Families scattered ash over glowing embers before sleeping, trapping heat beneath it. In the morning, the sleeper nearest the hearth could push ash aside, revealing a faint red glow, and feed it with new wood. This method conserved fuel and spared the effort of striking flint every day. Picture yourself leaning over the hearth, ash smudging your face, uncovering that tiny ember like a buried jewel. Later medieval sources confirm this technique was common across Europe, making it likely the Vikings practiced it too. The method was simple yet crucial. In the north, every strategy to preserve fire was vital. Ash became a blanket for embers, and embers a promise of survival. An interesting aside, ash wasn't just insulation. It also served as a cleaning agent. Households rubbed ash on greasy pots or even hair as a primitive shampoo. Imagine crawling into bed with ash under your fingernails, knowing the same substance kept your hearth alive. In the Viking world, nothing went to waste, not even soot. Now consider the sensory reality. At night, the hearth was less a roaring blaze than a faintly glowing line of coals beneath a gray covering. Occasional pops of escaping sparks filled the air. Thin threads of light weaved through the ash. The scent of char mixed with damp wool and fur. That faint warmth was enough to keep frost at bay. To a Viking, those glowing coals were as valuable as silver. Specialists debate how many fires burned at once, but all agree the hearth's maintenance was central to survival. In Viking longhouses, debate continues over whether families relied on a single central hearth or multiple smaller fires spread across the hall. Excavations in Greenland, for instance, uncovered several burned patches that may indicate separate hearths. Were these redundancies in case one fire went out, or simply a response to the challenge of heating such vast spaces? The evidence leaves room for both interpretations. A single grand fire dimming into embers, or several smaller hearths glowing faintly along the hall. Consider the human effort behind maintaining these fires. Someone always rose during the night to check the embers, push them together, and add fuel. This task was informal but constant. Picture a sleepy man standing by the hearth, breath visible in the cold air, poking at the ash, muttering softly before returning to rest. These half-awake guardians ensured warmth endured. Accounts from sites like SARS note that fires sometimes died during the night, forcing households to rekindle flames with embers borrowed from neighbors. Carrying a glowing clay pot through the snow was both practical and symbolic, Warmth was a shared resource, a reminder that Viking communities depended on each other. At dawn, the hall remained dim, the hearth banked low. You stir, feeling the chill, and approach the fire. Ash crumbles in your hands, revealing a faint orange ember. Carefully adding twigs and branches, the glow spreads, smoke rising, life returning to the hall. Others wake, relieved they are spared the struggle of starting the fire from scratch. In that moment, you've carried a secret flame through the night, a bridge from darkness to morning. Scholars still question how much wood longhouses consumed each winter. Estimates suggest several tons, an enormous labor burden. Banking embers under ash was not just convenient, it was essential. Each preserved ember reduced fuel needs, limiting hours spent chopping and hauling wood. The practice also carried emotional significance. Discovering a faint glow in the dark assured safety, signaling that the household remained alive and warm. Its absence would have caused anxiety, a stark reminder of vulnerability. Lying back in bed, one could reflect on the quiet endurance of the ash-covered hearth. Its soft glow mattered more than a roaring blaze. For Vikings, survival was not about spectacle but about keeping a small ember alive through the night. This ember was the hall's heartbeat, a promise that even in the deepest cold, dawn would come. Not all Viking households relied solely on the hearth. Some introduced tools to extend warmth, including iron braziers and oil lamps. These were rare and costly, but in certain homes, they provided portable pockets of heat and light. Archaeological digs at high-status sites have uncovered metal braziers, shallow iron containers darkened by heat. Filled with glowing coals, they could be moved around the hall to warm specific areas. Picture a weary mother placing one near her children's bedding, its faint red glow softening the chill from the turf walls. Unlike the fixed central hearth, these braziers offered flexible warmth, supplementing the household's primary fire. Flexible, shifting warmth wherever survival demanded it. Archaeological records show the presence of oil lamps, small stone or clay bowls with blackened rims, scorched by flames. Filled with animal fat or fish oil, a simple wick drew the fire. These lamps provided light, yes, but also a modest heat, flickering yet precious when every degree counted. Imagine the faint scent of fish oil mixing with wood smoke, a child's eyes reflecting the trembling flame as stories stretched late into the night. Evidence confirms that Norse settlers in Greenland and Iceland relied heavily on fish oil lamps during the long winters when wood was scarce. Wealthier Scandinavian households may also have used them to supplement hearths. The glow from oil lamps was insufficient to fully light a hall, but softened the oppressive darkness, making a long house feel less like a cave and more like a home. Experiments with reconstructed longhouses reveal a curious detail. Iron braziers often worsened air quality. Moving hot coals produced more smoke and heightened fire hazards. Reenactors report coughing while testing them in confined spaces, joking that Vikings either had tougher lungs or greater desperation. One can almost picture someone dragging a brazier too close to a straw mattress, sparks flying, curses echoing, reminding us that survival and danger were always intertwined. Scholars debate how common these tools were. Some argue they were luxuries reserved for chieftains or wealthy traders who could afford iron and oil. Others point to the simplicity of stone lamps and occasional brazier fragments found even at modest farms, suggesting broader use. The disagreement persists, but the fragments prove at least some families enjoyed the comfort of auxiliary flames. Consider the sensory experience. A brazier hisses as a coal shifts, sending thin smoke upward. Its faint red glow illuminates faces, warming a circle barely large enough for 2 or 3 sleepers. An oil lamp flickers, its flame dancing when a draft sneaks in, then steadying again. The smell of fish oil is pungent, clinging to wool and fur. Yet in this dim circle, fear of the dark recedes, and warmth reaches stiff fingers. Later folklore hints at a belief in lamps' protective power. Flames burning all night were thought to repel spirits or wandering souls. Whether this belief existed in the Viking Age is uncertain, but the continuity of practice suggests it may have. Picture a family guarding a lamp, not only for light, but to keep frost spirits at bay. In drafty, long nights, that faith could have been as important as the heat itself. From a practical perspective, braziers and lamps reveal Vikings' willingness to experiment. They layered solutions. Fire at the center, coals in a brazier, oil in a lamp, furs over bodies, creating a network of defenses against winter. Each carried risks, but together they pushed back the cold just enough. Emotionally, too, these small flames mattered. For a child lying awake in smoky darkness, a tiny oil lamp may have offered more comfort than the roaring hearth. The big fire smoked and thundered, but the lamp glowed softly, like a personal guardian. Sleeping in its light meant feeling watched over, even as drafts howled and goats snorted nearby. As you picture it, the Viking longhouse is not a monolithic hall of smoke, but a patchwork of glowing hearts. The central hearth, a brazier by the bench, a lamp flickering near the door. Each flame pushed back darkness in its own way. Each spark reminded occupants that survival came not from one grand solution, but dozens of small, fragile fires tended through the night. And, when morning finally arrived, the embers, lamps, and braziers reminded everyone that they had survived yet another winter night. Comfort was rare, luxury non-existent, but for Vikings this was enough, and in their world enough was everything. The longhouse creaked in the wind again, and your hand traces the wall. The timber feels rough, heavy, and solid, but it's more than just wood. It represents clever carpentry, with insulation techniques borrowed from another Viking skill: shipbuilding. These people were not just farmers or raiders. They were master craftsmen of the sea. Many of the methods that kept water out of their ships were adapted to keep the cold out of their homes. Archaeologists studying longhouse remains often highlight their ship-like qualities. The walls sloped inward like a vessel's hull, increasing stability against storms and snow. The turf-layered roofs, with overlapping sods, mimicked the overlapping planks of a longship, each piece shedding water from the next. It's as if every Viking brought a piece of the sea home in the very shape of their dwelling. A striking example comes from Greenland, where settlers built homes with double walls, an inner timber frame and an outer layer of tightly packed turf, sometimes reinforced with seaweed. The seaweed acted as insulation, filling gaps and trapping warmth. Imagine dried kelp crackling between logs, an unlikely but effective defense against icy winds. Shipbuilders used a similar principle, stuffing fibers, moss, or animal hair between planks to keep water out. The same logic applied to houses, blocking wind from slicing through. Here's an intriguing detail. Some longhouses may have been built with recycled ship timbers. Wood was scarce in Scandinavia, so when a ship became unfit for the sea, its strong oak ribs could be repurposed for housing. You might sleep beneath beams that once creaked under ocean waves before creaking under winter storms. Scholars still debate whether these shipbuilding techniques were deliberately applied to architecture. Some argue the similarities are coincidental, practical solutions arising independently. Others believe the parallels are too striking to ignore, suggesting shipwrights consciously adapted their skills for homes. Evidence remains incomplete, but the idea is compelling. The sea and the hearth constructed from the same logic. Close your eyes and feel these ship-like walls. The inward slope creates a hall that embraces you like a vessel's hull. Snow slides off the turf roof as water would off a deck. The timbers groan under wind like planks under waves. In this sense, the longhouse is not just a house but a beached ship, carrying its occupants through winter rather than across oceans. Another fascinating connection is corking. Viking ships were sealed with tar and resin to stay watertight. Some evidence suggests similar sealants were applied to house timbers to block drafts. Picture the sharp, piney smell of tar mixing with smoke and wool indoors. To modern noses, it may seem harsh, but for Vikings, it was likely the scent of safety. The same substance that kept ships afloat kept children warm. Ventilation also mirrored seafaring logic. Ships required airflow below decks, and homes needed ventilation to let smoke escape. Some reconstructed longhouses feature vents angled like hatches, designed to open or close depending on wind. Scholars debate whether this was intentional, but the resemblance is striking. A shipwright might have seen a smoke hole as just another hatch balancing air and enclosure. Finally, consider the cultural layer. For a seafaring people, ships were more than transportation. They symbolized identity, prestige, and myth. Designing homes with echoes of ships may not have been purely practical. It may have been cultural, a way of connecting daily life with the sea. The sea. Picture a Viking farmer proudly pointing to his turf-roofed hall and half-joking, saying, "This house sails through winter. Consider what it feels like inside." The turf muffles the wind, double walls block drafts, and the hall feels more solid than a simple wooden shack. Smoke may make you cough, fleas may bite, and you may jostle with neighbors. Yet there is a sense of security. The house is more than wood and earth. It is the work of skilled builders who understood how to shape nature for human needs. Scholars debate whether the ship-like logic of these homes was intentional or coincidental. Some argue builders simply used the knowledge they had, while others suggest that the seafaring mindset permeated culture so deeply that even houses reflected it. Either way, the outcome is clear. Longhouses capable of withstanding storms just as ships endure waves. Press your hand against the timber, feel its grain, smell the tar, hear it creak. You are in a vessel not for water but for winter, a ship meant to survive the cold, not sail the seas. In that realization, you glimpse the quiet genius of Viking adaptation. The same hands carving dragon-headed prows also built halls where families endured harsh nights together. The fire pops softly, and voices rise above it, sharing stories. Archaeologists and historians searching for Viking sleep habits do not rely solely on ruins or artifacts. They also examine sagas, Eddic poems, and medieval writings. These texts, blending history and myth, hint at longhouse nights, often casually, as if sleep were just a backdrop to daily life. One detail stands out. Saga authors frequently mention the eldest or describe characters lying by the fire or on benches. These phrases confirm what ruins show. Benches lined the walls, and people slept around the central hearth. The arrangement was ordinary, unremarkable, so routine it needed no explanation. Sometimes, however, sagas provide sharper insights. In Erbygja saga, for instance, gatherings are described where people stayed up late around the fire, talking and listening to stories before finally lying down on benches. Imagine a hall alive with laughter, boasting, and gossip, gradually giving way to bodies sinking under cloaks as snoring takes over. The rhythm of night captured in narrative. A curious detail emerges in poetry. Heroes are sometimes described sleeping with weapons. Close by, archaeological finds support this, with swords and spears discovered in burials, as if the dead were ready to rise. In daily life, this may indicate warriors kept arms nearby, prepared for night raids. Picture lying on straw, furs pulled high, one hand on a sword hilt, comfort and vigilance side by side. Scholars debate how literally to take these accounts. Were they true habits or heroic embellishments? Some note sagas were written centuries later and may exaggerate. Others argue that the repeated, casual details point to truth. It is a puzzle where interpretation weighs as heavily as evidence. Consider the poetry itself. Skaldic verses sometimes depict halls thick with ember smoke or crowded with men under beams. Though indirect, these images convey reality. The smoke inspires metaphor, and the cramped benches are notable enough to appear in verse. Even in poetry striving for grandeur, the mundane realities of sleep slip through. One odd note. Some tales describe restless nights disturbed by spirits, dreams, or ghostly visitors pressing on sleepers' chests. Were these purely narrative devices, or did they reflect real anxieties and experiences? Have you ever wondered what smoky, uneasy nights truly felt like? Anyone who's woken in a cramped, coughing haze knows how easily dreams can blur into fear. Some sagas capture that disorientation more accurately than they may have intended. You can almost feel it yourself, lying half awake in the longhouse. The rafters loom overhead, firelight twisting into shifting shadows. A child stirs, murmurs, and falls silent. Someone whispers a prayer. Another coughs. The hall slowly settles again. In this dim light, it's easy to imagine dreams taking form, ancestors stepping down from smoke to speak. Historians also use these texts to understand social customs. Seating at feasts often reflected status. The most honored closer to the fire, the less important nearer the door. A saga noting someone's spot on the bench is more than about furniture. It shows social hierarchy woven into even nightly rest. Who stayed warm and who shivered could depend on this unconscious order. Another revealing detail is the Old Norse word sang, meaning bed. But it rarely referred to a frame. More often, it described bedding, straw, furs, or cloaks spread wherever one lay. Language itself tells us that beds were portable and flexible. You weren't given a private room. You were given a sang, a bundle of materials, whether on a bench or the floor. Sleep wasn't private, it was practical and shared. Scholars debate how much to read into these literary hints. Some see them as cultural memory, snapshots of everyday life. Others argue they were shaped by later Christian scribes and may not be fully reliable. Yet when paired with archaeology, a clearer picture emerges. A hall smelling of smoke, benches layered with straw, bodies wrapped in cloaks, stories fading into snores. The sensory detail of these texts matters. Imagine sagas recited while lying in the longhouse, the words rising above the fire's crackle, conjuring images of gods and battles as you scratch at fleas under your cloak. Heroic tales and daily life were intertwined. Sleep in Viking times happened amid stories, not separate from them. As you roll onto your side, soot stinging your eyes, sagas reveal more than entertainment. They are windows into how people lived and slept. They depict survival, not luxury. And as you drift off, you might wonder if future storytellers will remember you. 2. Just another body pressed into the longhouse night. Tonight, the hall feels almost festive. Benches are crowded not just with family, but neighbors and travelers. A feast has stretched late into the night, bringing warmth both literal and social. In Viking society, winter feasts were as much about enduring the cold as honoring gods or kin. The fire burns brighter, food is richer, drink flows, and bodies collapse into sleep fully satisfied. Longhouses filled with revelers were paradoxically warmer than quiet nights. Archaeological evidence supports this. Oversized halls, wider hearths, extra benches, and traces of mass cooking. Sagas also describe banquets lasting late into the night, with songs, boasts, and copious meat. After such indulgence, benches and floors were crowded with sleepers, cloaks drawn over heads, bellies full of stew and ale. A notable tradition was the Yule, the midwinter feast. It wasn't just ritual or worship, it was practical. At the darkest time of year, food and fire were abundant, sustaining bodies for the lean months ahead. When dozens gathered, the longhouse became a hub of warmth, light, and life. The combined warmth of so many bodies raised the hall's temperature noticeably. You can almost feel it. The air heavy, the frost outside softened by laughter and perspiration. Saga accounts offer vivid snapshots of drunken guests collapsing onto their cloaks, sleeping near half-like logs by the fire. These weren't private sleeping spots. They were shared, communal slumbers. You might wake in the night with a stranger's elbow across your chest or stumble over someone who had dozed off mid-song. After a feast, the longhouse resembled a battlefield of snoring, bodies strewn in chaotic comfort. Scholars debate how often these large gatherings occurred. Some argue they were seasonal or annual, coinciding with festivals like Yule or harvest. Others suggest that in affluent communities, feasts happened regularly, serving as displays of generosity and ways for chieftains to secure loyalty. Regardless, the effect was the same. Feast nights made the hall warmer and noisier, providing a temporary refuge, not only from cold, but also from isolation. Picture it now. The fire roars, sparks rising into smoke-filled rafters. The aroma of roasted pork and spiced meats clings to wool cloaks and beards. Ale has spilled across the floor, the bench crowded with drowsy revelers. Music fades into murmurs, then into the low, rhythmic chorus of snores. The heat feels nearly suffocating. Your cheeks flush even as drafts slip through wall cracks. You drift to sleep, not in silence, but to the fading hum of communal life. There was a deeper comfort here. A hall full of guests offered more than warmth. It provided security. Strangers nearby acted as temporary allies, making raids or threats less likely. The bustle of bodies offered not only physical protection from the cold but also social protection from fear. Later medieval writers often mocked these feasts, labeling the Norse as gluttonous or unruly. Yet beneath their scorn lies a truth. These gatherings worked. They reinforced bonds, fed bellies, warmed bodies, and helped people endure harsh nights. What outsiders saw as disorder was, for the Vikings, a practical survival strategy. Scholars still question how these feasts affected daily life. Did families lose sleep amid the noise and crowds? Or did the extra warmth outweigh the inconvenience? Experiments in reconstructed halls suggest the latter. Even thin bedding felt indulgent when shared body heat raised the temperature. Minor discomforts were accepted to avoid freezing. Imagine curling up on your straw mattress, cloak over your head, surrounded by dozens of snoring companions. Nearby, a man mutters of victories in his sleep. A child whimpers in a dream. A drunken uncle groans. The fire pops. The hall moves with the restless tide of communal slumber. It is messy, loud, yet strangely comforting. Warmth from food, drink, and proximity carries you through the night. At dawn, the hall will stir with groans and laughter. Stories will be retold of who snored loudest, who spilled ale, who clambered onto the wrong bench. The memory of warmth will outlast any hangover. In the Viking world, nights like these were not interruptions, they were survival in disguise. You sink deeper into your furs, belly full, head lightly buzzing, and grasp the quiet brilliance of Viking feasting. It was not mere indulgence. It was protection against cold, despair, and the loneliness of winter. In that smoky, crowded hall, the hum of humanity lulls you to sleep. The embers glow low, and you notice a stranger curled near your feet. His cloak is travel-stained, his boots caked in frozen mud. He is neither family nor neighbor, yet he has been granted a corner for the night. Hospitality in the Viking world was not a luxury, it was essential for survival. If a stranger appeared at your door in winter, you wouldn't leave him to freeze. You'd welcome him into the smoky longhouse, offer fire and food, and give him space to sleep, however tight it might be. The sagas frequently mention this custom. Guests expected a seat and warmth, and a host's reputation was judged by how generously they provided it. Archaeological evidence supports this. Many longhouses were built large enough not only for families and livestock but for visitors as well. The unspoken rule was clear. In the north, a closed door could mean death, while an open house earned honor, and a refusal brought shame. You can almost feel it as you lie on your bedding. The stranger exhales, his breath mixing with yours in the smoky air. His presence makes the hall warmer, though less comfortable. His snores join the chorus, his body heat adding to the pool of warmth. You might grumble about the smell, yet you know you would hope for the same kindness if you arrived half-frozen on a stormy night. Saga literature often mentions a store or guest space in Icelandic texts. Whether this was a literal room or a designated area of the hall, it highlights how central hospitality was. Even in cramped longhouses, some space, however drafty, was reserved for newcomers. Interestingly, some stories suggest guests were expected to share news or gossip in return for lodging. Hospitality was more than warmth and food. It was an exchange of information. Imagine lying half asleep, listening to travelers whisper about distant markets, kings, or storms, while children pressed close to hear tales of lands they might never see. Guests could bring warmth not only to the body but to the imagination. Scholars debate whether this generosity was purely altruistic. Some argue Viking hospitality was strategic. Reputation mattered more than wealth, and being known as a generous host could secure allies in times of need. Others suggest it was pragmatic, protecting the household from potential harm, as strangers could bring enemies or curses. Either way, longhouses became revolving doors where family, kin, servants, and travelers shared the same smoky roof. Now imagine the sensory overload of such a night. You already sleep beside children and livestock. Add travelers damp from snow, cloaks heavy with frost melting into puddles. The smells intensify: sweat, wet wool, manure, fish oil from lamps. Benches are crowded, straw flattened by unfamiliar bodies, elbows and knees pressing into your ribs. Privacy, already rare, disappears. Yet the warmth rises, the hall feels fuller, and the night becomes survivable. Burial evidence shows that some travelers were honored with bedding goods in death, suggesting that being hosted carried symbolic weight. Sharing warmth in life extended even to burial with furs and cloaks. It shows how deeply hospitality was embedded in Viking culture. Emotionally, welcoming strangers was a balance of risk and reward. A guest could mean safety and friendship, but also danger. Was the man at your feet harmless? Or did he carry illness, secrets, or ill intentions? Trust was a necessity, tested nightly with every visitor who laid down on your straw. A detail that might make you smile. Medieval sources complain about rowdy guests who drank too much and overstayed. Hosts might have regretted their generosity, perhaps wishing a drunken traveler had stayed out in the snow. Yet hospitality law prevailed. The hall was a lifeline for kin and strangers alike. So you close your eyes again, feeling the stranger's breath and warmth mingling with yours. His presence is uncomfortable, yes, but it is the warmth of survival, community, and a culture that measured honor by the generosity of its hearth. In the Viking world, surviving the winter alone was impossible. Hospitality bound families, villages, and even strangers together. Halls were noisy, smoky, and crowded, but they were vital. As sleep takes hold, it becomes clear that the hall was less a house and more a living network of survival, keeping everyone warm. Even after the hall quiets, your mind drifts to the graves left behind. Archaeologists uncover not just weapons, jewelry, and tools, but also bedding. Straw imprints, fur fragments, tufts of wool, and carefully folded blankets beside the dead. For Vikings, how one slept in life mattered in death. A grave without warmth was unimaginable. The Oberg ship burial in Norway illustrates this vividly. 2 high-status women were laid on beds covered with textiles and animal hides. Though decayed, the fabric fragments show intricate weaves and dyes, luxury bedding for their final journey. Even ordinary graves often held traces of wool and fur, suggesting that all Vikings, regardless of wealth, were ensured a bed for eternity. The principle is simple yet profound. If warmth meant survival in life, it mattered in the afterlife. Children were wrapped in fur blankets. Warriors were laid with cloaks. Women received bedding as if to rest after their journey to the next world. Sleep and death intertwined, both demanding comfort and warmth. Some graves reveal feathers mixed with wool, indicating down pillows or mattresses, mostly for elites. This contrast is striking. One man with rough straw, another with soft down, both seeking warmth, even in silence. Scholars debate whether these burial goods were practical comforts or symbols of status. Some argue for spiritual purpose, others for social display. Likely, the truth lies somewhere in between. Regardless, the message is clear. Bedding mattered. Furs, wool, and straw were as central to Viking identity as weapons or jewelry. The blankets that kept a family warm in life also carried them into the next world. Picture a burial mound. Cold air surrounds gathered families as they drape a cloak over the deceased, tuck in furs, or spread straw beneath the body. The gestures are tender, familiar, the same motions from the Longhouse performed one last time. Burying someone was putting them to bed, believing warmth still mattered beyond life. Sensory echoes, the smell of wool, the texture of fur, the crunch of straw, remind the living of nights shared in smoky halls. Funerals mirrored daily life. The bedding that cradled the dead had once cradled the living. A grave from Birka, Sweden, shows a child laid on birch bark beneath straw. Scholars debate whether it added insulation or symbolized purity, but it shows that even minor comforts carried into burial practices. The dead were never sent naked. They were wrapped as for sleep. The sagas reflect this cultural overlap. Warriors are described as lying with cloaks pulled tight in both life and death, blurring the line between sleep and the grave. Death was merely a longer night, one for which bedding remained essential. Many graves show that Vikings treated the dead with the same care and warmth they valued in life. Text. This version maintains the original structure and length, simplifies some sentences for readability, avoids repeated phrasing, and keeps the professional tone intact. Animals lived close to humans, horses, dogs, even cattle. Some interpret their presence as symbolic companions, but consider the nightly reality of the longhouse, where animals slept just a partition away. To lie beside beasts in death may have reflected the closeness of life, when cows' warm breaths filled the hall and goats moved through the dark. Scholars still debate the emphasis to place on this practice. Some argue that grave bedding primarily signaled status, displaying costly textiles and furs. Others focus on spiritual symbolism, suggesting a belief in a journey after death that required rest and warmth. Both interpretations carry weight. What is clear is that Viking burials reveal a careful attention to the materiality of sleep. Imagine it, lying in your cloak, knowing it will one day wrap you in the earth, smoothing a fur over a child, aware that someday that same fur might lie in a grave. In a world where every night was a battle against cold, death itself was seen as another night to endure. Warmth, both literal and symbolic, was the ultimate safeguard. So as you curl up on a bench, scratching at straw and tugging your cloak closer, you understand that Vikings did not separate life, sleep, and death. All three intertwined, shaped by the same furs, cloaks, and fires. Life was a fight against the cold. Sleep was a fight together. Death carried that fight into another realm, wrapped in the same bedding that protected you through countless nights. The hall tonight feels different, restless, unsettled. Sleep is not easy, and you sense why. In Viking culture, the night was not only a time for rest, it was a time of danger. Darkness held uncertainty, whispers of raiders, spirits, and dreams that might not be dreams at all. To lie down under a cloak was not merely to close one's eyes against the cold. It was to place trust in the fragile defenses of wood, fire, and community. Sagas provide glimpses of this unease. Characters describe being kept awake by fear or rising at night to check doors and fires. The longhouse was never impregnable. Timber and turf could fend off frost. But what of thieves slipping through the dark? Enemies waiting for families to sleep before striking? One saga recounts raiders bursting into a hall at dawn, cutting down men still groggy from sleep. Nights were not safe havens, they could be traps. Archaeologists note weapons placed near sleeping areas. Graves reveal swords laid beside men, women, and even children, suggesting weapons remained close, ready at a moment's notice. Imagine lying down with a spear propped against the bench, its shadow stretching across the smoky wall. Sleep came lightly, with one ear always alert for the crunch of snow outside. Dogs occasionally slept in halls as guardians, according to sagas. Their barks would alert residents if strangers approached. Dogs were more than companions, they were alarm systems. A restless growl could send a man reaching for his axe before he even opened his eyes. Warmth and family offered comfort, yet fear pressed at the edges of consciousness. Scholars debate how deep this fear ran. Some argue Viking villages were tight-knit, making raids rare and communities mostly peaceful. Others suggest sagas reflect genuine anxiety about sudden violence. The disagreement highlights the ambiguity of evidence. But whether fear was constant or occasional, it shaped how Vikings thought about sleep, not as surrender but as vigilance. Consider the sensory experience. Wrapped in furs, every creak of timber makes your heart jump. The wind rattles roof boards, and you wonder if it is storm or footsteps. Smoke curls above the hearth, forming strange shapes, and your half-dreaming mind imagines spirits. A cough beside, you are reassured, yet constantly reminded of how fragile life truly is. Sleep, when it finally comes, carries as much risk as relief. Threats weren't just human. Folklore was full of nocturnal creatures, trolls, dogger, and restless spirits, said to wander the night, pressing down on sleepers' chests and twisting dreams into nightmares. Sagas recount entire households waking in terror from these visitations. Were these supernatural tales merely metaphors for smoke-induced hallucinations, Or did Vikings genuinely fear attacks from unseen forces during sleep? Historians debate this, but the sheer volume of stories suggests these beliefs strongly influenced nightly imagination. Smoke may have played a role in these fears. Modern studies show that smoke inhalation disrupts sleep, causes shallow breathing, and can trigger vivid dreams or hallucinations. Lying in a smoky longhouse, eyes stinging, coughing constantly, blurred the line between reality and nightmare. A shadow in the rafters could easily become a spirit. A dream of suffocation feel like a dagger pressing on your chest. Nightly fear was shaped not just by sagas, but by lived experience. One striking discovery from Icelandic farm ruins is the remains of heavy doors and locking mechanisms. Even in remote settlements, families secured themselves carefully. Some scholars suggest this was to protect livestock rather than prevent murder. Still, the underlying message is clear. Doors were more than barriers against cold. They were defenses against intrusion. Bolting the hall at night acknowledged the world outside could not be trusted. Consider the emotional weight of this. Every night demanded balancing two realities. Sleep was necessary, yet complete relaxation was impossible. Parents lay awake, one ear tuned to their children's breathing, the other to the storm. Warriors clutched swords beneath blankets. Elderly women whispered charms to repel spirits, murmuring prayers that dawn would arrive undisturbed. Sleep was communal and fear was too. Scholars debate how fear of raids shaped Viking society. Some argue it cultivated toughness, a culture where rest was always partial, always ready for battle. Others suggest it promoted cohesion. Families sleeping close, sharing vigilance, strengthened bonds through mutual awareness of vulnerability. Both interpretations likely hold truth, explaining the loyalty and ferocity Vikings became known for. As you imagine lying again in a straw bed, the contradiction is clear: warmth on one side, fear on the other. The fire glows, your family breathes around you, yet your ears strain for every noise. In the Viking longhouse, sleep was never just rest. It was daring to close your eyes in a world where danger pressed against thin walls, and each dawn proved survival against both cold and night. Yet warmth came at a cost. The longhouse was also a cradle for illness. Smoke-filled air, pests in bedding, and dozens of people sharing the same space made disease unavoidable. Archaeological evidence tells a sobering story. Viking skeletons reveal chronic respiratory problems, ribs deformed by persistent coughing, lungs scarred from years of soot inhalation. Smoke kept frostbite at bay, but clean air was rare. Falling asleep while the chest rattled with phlegm, coughing through the night, and a child wheezing in the corner was not exceptional. It was the nightly norm. Turf roofs trapped humidity, allowing moisture to seep into wood and bedding, creating ideal conditions for illness. Icelandic archaeological sites reveal preserved mold spores in turf remains, evidence that the walls themselves exacerbated health risks. You roll over, aware that comfort and danger coexisted in every longhouse night, a delicate balance of warmth, fear, and survival. You lie on a straw mattress and realize that fleas aren't your only concern. Invisible fungi and bacteria drift through the smoky darkness. There's an unsettling detail. Lice themselves may have spread disease. Some researchers believe typhus-like illnesses circulated in these crowded halls, passed from head to head during nightly scratching. Picture a family combing lice by firelight, flicking them into the flames, unaware they might also be burning disease. The warmth that fostered closeness also spread contagion. Scholars debate how deadly longhouse living truly was. Some argue these health risks were constant but manageable, countered by strong immune systems and herbal remedies. Others contend the longhouse environment was harsh, shortening lives and causing high child mortality. The evidence doesn't provide clear answers, only hints of a delicate balance between survival and suffering. Now sense this hall. The smoke is so thick it stings your eyes. Someone coughs violently nearby, shaking under furs. Another shifts, feverish and murmuring in delirium. The straw beneath you is damp with sweat, and the air tastes sour. One sick body can spread infection through the hall in days. Yet families had remedies. Viking texts mention herbs like yarrow, juniper, and angelica for treating illness. A woman might scatter herbs in bedding to freshen it or burn juniper to cleanse the air. Did it work? Maybe slightly, maybe only psychologically, but even the act of scattering herbs offered hope. In a hall ruled by smoke and fleas, hope itself was a kind of warmth. Archaeology in York uncovered latrine deposits full of parasite eggs, roundworm, whipworm. Even tapeworms were common in Viking intestines. Imagine lying in the smoky hall, stomach twisting not from hunger but from writhing parasites. Sleep was shallow, broken by cramps and discomfort. The Longhouse was both a shelter and an incubator of illness. Yet people endured. Children coughed yet grew strong. Mothers itched yet rose before dawn to tend the fire. Men wheezed yet went to work with axes in hand. Resilience was woven into their daily lives. Scholars still wonder how Vikings interpreted these illnesses. Did they blame smoke or spirits? Some sagas describe sickness as curses or trials from the gods, but others suggest pragmatic observation. Smoky houses made people ill, so vents were adjusted, bedding refreshed. Superstition and practical knowledge blurred in daily life. Consider the emotional rhythm. Parents pressed sick children to their chests for warmth. Elders muttered prayers while coughing themselves to sleep. Neighbors whispered about whether illness was caused by spirits or bad air. Nights were a theater of survival, fought not only against cold but disease. You can almost hear it. The uneven chorus of snores and coughs, some sharp, some wet, some lingering. The sounds tell the truth. This hall is alive, but alive with sickness. Still, families clung together, sharing warmth, herbs, and hope. You settle under your cloak, breathing smoky air that scratches your throat. Comfort and sickness are inseparable here. The same walls that protect you also choke you. The warmth that sustains you also breeds fever. In the Viking Longhouse, sleep was never simple rest. It was survival on a knife's edge, a nightly struggle against frost and disease. The hall groans under the weight of snow, but tonight your thoughts drift beyond survival. The Longhouse is not simply you lie on a straw mattress and realize that fleas aren't your only concern. Invisible fungi and bacteria drift through the smoky air, and there's a grim detail. Lice may have spread disease. Some researchers suggest typhus-like illnesses could have circulated here, passed from head to head during nightly scratching. Families combed lice by firelight, flicking them into the flames, unaware they might also be spreading illness. The same warmth that created closeness also encouraged contagion. Scholars debate how much mortality the Longhouse environment caused. Some argue these risks were constant but manageable, mitigated by strong immune systems and herbal remedies. Others insist life inside these halls was hazardous, contributing to high child mortality. The evidence offers no clear answers, only hints of a delicate balance between survival and suffering. Picture the hall now. Smoke thickens the air, making your eyes water. Someone nearby coughs, shivering under furs. Another stirs with fever, murmuring in delirium. The straw beneath you is damp with sweat, and the air tastes sour. One sick person could spread infection through the entire hall in days. Yet families had their remedies. Viking texts mention yarrow, juniper, and angelica for treating ailments. Women might scatter herbs in bedding to freshen it or burn juniper to clear the air. Did it help? Perhaps a little, or maybe just psychologically. Still, the act of using herbs offered hope, and in a hall dominated by smoke and fleas, hope was another form of warmth. An archaeological find in York revealed latrine deposits full of parasite eggs, roundworm, whipworm, and tapeworm. Imagine lying in the smoky hall, your stomach twisting not from hunger but from parasites. Sleep was shallow, broken by cramps and discomfort. The Longhouse was more than shelter, it incubated ailments. Yet people endured. A child coughed but still grew strong. A mother itched yet rose before dawn to tend the fire. A man wheezed and still took his axe to work. Resilience was built into every breath. How did Vikings understand these illnesses? Did they blame smoke, or did they see spirits at work? Some sagas describe sickness as curses or trials from the gods, but others suggest practical awareness. Smoky houses made people ill, so vents were adjusted and bedding refreshed. The line between superstition and observation blurred in daily life. Consider the emotional rhythm. Parents worrying over sick children pressed for warmth, elders muttering prayers as they coughed themselves to sleep, neighbors whispering about whether illness came from spirits or simply bad air. The night was a theater of survival, facing not just cold but disease. You can almost hear it. Snores and coughs, some sharp, some wet, some lingering. The sound is honest, the hall is alive with sickness. Yet families cling together, sharing warmth, herbs, and hope. You settle under your cloak again, breathing smoke that scratches your throat. Comfort and sickness are inseparable. The walls that protect also suffocate. The warmth that sustains also breeds fever. In a Viking longhouse, sleep was never simple rest. It was survival on a knife's edge, fought nightly against both frost and disease. The hall groans under the weight of snow. But tonight, you think less of smoke and straw and more of what this place means beyond survival. The longhouse is not simply a... Archaeologists examining settlement layouts note that longhouses were almost always central, larger and sturdier than surrounding structures. They signaled status, yes, scented your place in the social network. Your position, your neighbors, even the bedding itself conveyed information. Closer to the hearth suggested higher status. Nearer the door, lower. Hierarchy extended even into the smoky darkness. Reconstruction evidence shows that longhouses weren't only homes. They functioned as barns, workshops, feasting halls, and sleeping spaces all at once. Sleep never happened in isolation. While you rested on straw, someone sharpened a tool by the fire. A woman spun wool by lamp. A child coughed. An animal shifted. Life continued around you, intertwining with rest. An intriguing detail comes from the sagas. Disputes over sleeping spots. Benches were sometimes contested. Arguments flared over warmth, space, and whose cloak stretched farthest. Imagine bickering at night while others tried to drift off. A domestic comedy echoing in the same rafters that had held heroic boasts hours before. Scholars debate the social impact of these arrangements. Did sleeping pressed against relatives strengthen family loyalty or foster rivalry? Some anthropologists argue that the Viking emphasis on kinship and oaths stemmed from childhood habits of trust and proximity under shared blankets. Others point to saga feuds as proof that close quarters could equally breed hostility. The evidence remains inconclusive, but both possibilities feel real as you roll over into a cousin's elbow. Now consider the sensory tapestry of Viking sleep. The crackle of the fire was also the rhythm of storytelling. The scratch of straw mirrored the labor of harvest woven into bedding. Smoke carried the scent of ritual, linking gods, hearth, and ancestors. Even rest became a cultural act. Every sigh, snore, and whispered prayer contributed to a sense of belonging. Icelandic excavations revealed longhouses extended over generations. Sleeping platforms grew alongside families like living structures. Imagine lying in a hall where grandparents once slept, your children soon to join beside you. This continuity made sleep a thread in a multigenerational tapestry. Each night's rest was part of a centuries-long rhythm. Later folklore even suggested sleep shaped character. A child near the door, exposed to drafts, was believed to grow hardy. One by the fire, pampered. Whether superstition or not, it shows how Viking culture intertwined sleep with moral and social life. Scholars continue to explore the meaning of these nightly rituals. Some see them as practical fire, furs, benches. Others see symbolism, shaping identity, belief, and community. Combining archaeology, sagas, and folklore creates a richer picture. Sleep was survival, but also story, status, and spirituality. Now picture it once more. You lie on straw, cloak drawn high, child pressed against you. The fire smolders. Goats breathe softly behind a partition. Cousin snores at your feet. By modern standards, it isn't quiet, but it is profoundly human. Every sense is engaged in life itself. Engaged. Every bond tested. Every night endured together. The longhouse was more than a structure. It was culture etched into wood and wool. Nights were spent suspended between sleep and wakefulness. As you close your eyes, you realize that imagining how Vikings slept is inseparable from imagining how they lived. For them, rest intertwined with survival, community, identity, and continuity, all compressed into the smoky darkness of the hall. The night stretches toward its final hours. Lying half awake, the full picture of Viking sleep begins to crystallize. You feel the smoke sting your eyes, the straw scratch your skin, the furs press heavily against your chest. You share breath with children, knees touch relatives, listen to goats shifting in the dark, and whisper prayers into the smoke. Sleeping in a Viking longhouse meant surrendering not only to exhaustion but to a system of survival, culture, and meaning. Archaeologists and historians, reconstructing fragments of bone, wood, and saga text, reveal a world where nothing was wasted. A cloak became a blanket. A goat provided warmth. A fire held spiritual significance. Bedding was a toolkit for survival. Straw refreshed with ash, wool cloaks, hides traded from distant lands, and even down or feathers for the wealthy. Each night was an act of improvisation, blending human warmth, animal presence, and spiritual trust. One clear detail emerges. Sleep was fully integrated with life. The longhouse had no separate bedrooms. Meals, work, gossip, worship, and sleep flowed together. Others' presence was unavoidable. A cough stirred the hall. A story echoed across rafters. A dog's growl could awaken hands on weapons. Privacy, silence, and stillness were modern illusions. The Viking longhouse was dense, layered, alive. There was also chaos. Fleas jumped across furs. Ale-fueled snores rattled benches. Children wriggled, and raiders occasionally barged in. It was far from serene, messy, noisy, itchy, but still functional. Rest didn't need perfection. It needed endurance. Specialists debate how well Vikings slept. Some argue segmented sleep allowed them to manage fire tending and noise. Others suggest shallow, interrupted sleep left them permanently fatigued. The exact truth remains uncertain, but their continuity proves that whatever sleep they had, it sustained them through voyages, harvests, and battles. Imagine now lying in this hall. Benches creak under shifting bodies. The fire sighs beneath its cloak of ash. A cow exhales softly in its stall. Beside you, a child twitches in a dream, and your partner pulls the cloak tighter. You are wrapped in warmth, fragile yet sufficient. Smoke curls above like a second ceiling, hiding gods and spirits. Every detail is discomfort and survival. The Viking longhouse was more than a building. It was a vessel of the night, carrying families through frost and darkness. Its walls were hulls, rafters masts, benches bunks. If embers glowed in the morning and breath still rose, the night had been survived. Drift into the last dream, understanding that Vikings didn't overcome winter with luxury. They relied on closeness, ingenuity, and stubbornness. Each night's sleep was a victory. Each dawn, proof that this imperfect, smoky, crowded system was enough to keep life going. As the story closes, let the longhouse fade, the smoke disperse, the fire soften into ash. Bodies stretch and stir as dawn's gray light seeps through the roof. You have traversed every layer of Viking sleep. Straw, cloaks, furs, coughs, snores. The pressed warmth of children nearby. Swords kept close for vigilance. You've heard whispered warnings, felt pests scurry across the floor, watched embers coaxed back to life beneath a blanket of ash. Life in that hall was never quiet, never clean, never simple, but it was life. Now settle into your own space. Your room may be silent, your bed softer, your air clearer than the smoky breath of a turf-roofed hall, but carry with you the lesson from that distant world. Rest doesn't demand perfection. It needs enough. Enough warmth, enough closeness, enough faith that night will pass and dawn will come. The Vikings lived with far less than you have now. Yet they dreamed, they woke, they built, they sailed. As your body sinks into stillness, allow yourself the same surrender. The cold cannot reach you here. Shadows are just shadows. Every spark of your own warmth is safe, waiting for morning.